just depend on a data point, even an important one like the CPI. I like to say that we're data dependent, we're not data point dependent.
Nobody covers the Fed like Bloomberg, your global business authority. However you get your news.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak with Lee.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to Daybreak Australia.
This is Bloomberg Technology. This is Bloomberg Green.
On TV, radio, and the web, this is Bloomberg.
Welcome back. You're watching Bloomberg Markets Asia. Now, about 2/3 of the world's population has access to internet right now, but total global coverage may not happen for decades. One company that's helping remote regions get connected is Swarm, a lower-cost communications network with tiny satellites the size of a slice of toast and your palm, by the way. Its co-founder, Sarah Spankalo, was honored as a Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst in 2021, and the company has since been acquired by SpaceX. Sarah joins us from San Francisco. Sarah, good to have you with us.
Great to see you.
Hey, Sarah, we know that SpaceX is not quite an acquisitive company yet. It acquired Swarm about a year ago. How has it accelerated the goals and what Swarm does?
Yeah, so in so many ways we've accelerated. I think the last time we spoke, we maybe had about 100 satellites in space. I actually have one here for show and tell. And now we've launched our full commercial constellation of over 150 satellites, and we provide coverage all over the world. Our latencies have now dropped to under an hour, and that enables us to serve more of our customers doing like forest detection and illegal logging in the Brazilian rainforest and flood and water monitoring all over the world, and a million other exciting use cases. And we've also accelerated on the production front and sales. So it's been a huge lever to be part of SpaceX and is really helping us accelerate and bring low-cost connectivity to the world.
So Swarm has benefited from being acquired by SpaceX. How has Swarm contributed to SpaceX then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've come along and we have this whole network that's providing low-cost connectivity. SpaceX obviously has their incredible Starlink broadband service, and now at the totally opposite end of the spectrum, they also have a fully operational IoT offering, which is super complementary to a lot of our enterprise customers. And then our team is also working on a lot of future technologies and networks that you'll hear about in the near future, bringing our kind of regulatory and technical backgrounds and go-to-market and helping accelerate what we're doing on the SpaceX side as well on some really exciting programs that I truly believe will change the world. So I feel really privileged every day to get to work on those things.
So, Sarah, among what I imagine, based on what you just mentioned there, an extremely long list of priorities, what will be, say, top two these next 12 months then?
Yeah, I think on the Swarm side, you know, we're going really aggressive and ambitious in our goals. We're planning to sell about 10x what we did last year. That's very abnormal for a startup company to 10x year over year. Really trying to serve all continents, multiple countries around the globe, and really have an impact on the world with the technologies that we're connecting. We're also rolling out some new products that will allow even more customers in kind of the asset tracking space and logistics space to leverage Swarm's technologies. And then we're doing a lot of exciting stuff at SpaceX as well that we're not quite ready to talk about. We are going to hear some of those announcements come out in the next few months.
Right, okay. Yeah, and certainly very excited to hear about that bit too. Now, help me understand this, and obviously you guys are doing your part really just to give access to just the most remote parts of the world access to the internet. I'm curious, who are you displacing? Or, you know, should any provider be concerned given those plans that you said, is it 100x from last year?
10x, although 100x is a nice goal as well.
Sorry, extra zero.
Even more ambitious. I think that in some ways we are disturbing the legacy satellite providers like Iridium or Orbcomm that you might have heard about. But in a lot of places, we're actually, for the first time ever, we have our satellites are so small, really unique launch economics, and we pass those cost savings to the users. So for the first time, people can afford satellite like this cow agriculture agriculture application, there was off-grid box, which is doing water purification and providing electricity in remote communities that don't have cell service. And those types of applications typically could never afford satellite before, so they were just kind of out of luck. And at our $5 per device per month price point, which is 20x lower cost than satellite solutions like this in the past, they can afford it for the first time ever. So it's really about unlocking those use cases to actually be connected and enabling our customers to scale up and run their businesses even more effectively.
You know, Sarah, you have to draw a comparison with Starlink, right? When it comes to Swarm, it is the cheapest. Starlink is possibly on the opposite end. I mean, how do the two come together?
I see them as very synergistic. So Starlink is obviously connecting consumers in remote locations, and often a lot of the same use cases, connecting, firefighters, rural communities, but it's broadband, high-speed internet, low latency. So you can play like video games over this type of internet. So it's quite a different application. Boats and planes and yachts and RVs can all benefit from this type of technology where people are being connected and having high-speed links. And then by contrast, Swarm is generally connecting devices. So we're connecting an agriculture sensor or a forest fire detection or an illegal logger detection. So it's less about people and it's more about devices. And I see them as really complementary, and we're realizing that a lot of companies actually need a high-speed solution for connecting people and a low-speed, low-cost solution for making sure their assets are tracked.
Sarah, before we let you go, we hardly talk about women in the space sector, and we know that you are the top 32 Canadian astronaut candidate as well. So firmly in the space sector, what were some of the challenges, and what advice would you like to give to those women interested in being where you are?
That's a great question. I'm not super prepared for that one. I think it's just, women can do anything. I think that, Gwen Shotwell is the COO of SpaceX. She's been there for 20 years. She's been a huge inspiration for me. And I think when you see women that are more senior than you and more experienced and have had success, it's paving the way. But I think we truly need to believe that we can do anything. And I've felt that way since I was a little girl, and I still feel that way. And that has just empowered me to continue to, push at these hard problems and hopefully encourage and empower other people to pave the way as well.
Yeah, Sarah, this is literally aim for the moon, right? Quite literally. Sarah, thank you.
Or Mars. I think Mars.
Swarm, co-founder, and also SpaceX Satellite Engineering Senior Director. Right, coming up here in the show, we will look into these latest 13F filings here and really tell you what some of these big-name investors were trading as Wall Street entered a bear market. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's a community of global leaders and innovators who are blazing new trails to transform business and government. This platform will help them share their ideas with the world and provide access to the resources they need to bring them to life. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
I'm going to take a look right here at regulation.
We are seeing digital currencies under some pressure.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people.
I want to have some of my money outside of the sovereign.
The transactions.
It all comes down to the details here.
And the technology.
How does that affect disruptors like you?
What happens to everything that you're investing in when the last Bitcoin is mined?
Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays.
right. In the U.S., 13F filings have come in for a second quarter and showing how top money managers were positioning as, of course, we saw U.S. stocks enter into a bear market and fell to lows of the year. Let's bring in Sue Keenan. She's been scouring through these filings here to walk us through what we found. And Sue, what are some of the key takeaways?
Risk management was undoubtedly the key theme, and a lot of these funds, of course, were dumping stock and then buying on the dip. A lot of funds did more selling than buying, but of course took advantage of the market drop to pick up some bargain basements. Let's take a look at Alphabet, which was a popular buy the dip option, got scooped up by a lot of big funds, but so did Amazon.com, which fell 35% during the quarter. D1 Capital Partner, Co2, Maverick Capital, Lone Pine, and George Soros investment firm all increased their Amazon stakes. Big focus on Stanley Druckenmiller's Duquesne family office. Stanley Druckenmiller, one of the big titans in trading since the 90s, and he picked up some stocks such as Eli Lilly, CrowdStrike, Moderna, but also notably sold his entire 199 million position in Amazon.com and scaled back his position in Microsoft. We saw a lot of other firms also scale back on Microsoft. Dumped a lot of tech in the first quarter too. Now, stocks to watch change hands include a lot of the tech stocks and also some of the tech stocks from Asia, such as Alibaba and JD.com. Funds were either buying them or selling them, sometimes both. For instance, Tesla, Amazon, Alphabet. Bridgewater exited Alibaba and JD.com. Co2 added to holdings in Alibaba and JD.com. Soros Management exited DD Global, but many of the funds that pile back into these big names that you see right there did so just weeks before. All of them spiked on the new view more recently that the Fed may not have to hike as aggressively as originally thought. So timing was good on buying back in, it appears. Again, a lot of these 13Fs are really just snapshots. We don't know when exactly they bought. We just know what they had in their portfolio at the end of the quarter.
Yeah, the art of deduction. Sue Keenan there with the latest out of the 13F filings here. A glance at some of your property counters here in Hong Kong. Substantial gains. We'll talk about some of these reports leading to this, and also China's biggest builder losing its investment grade rating. That's Country Garden, by the way.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Companies need to think about how they normalize Blackness and they normalize the Black aesthetic and what it really means to be inclusive. And that means to recognize and appreciate and respect and celebrate all aspects of culture and different cultures. And so it's critically important that we recognize that this is an issue, just as my sisters have said, and make sure that we recognize how that issue shows up in the workplace and how we can be advocates and allies in action to ensure that no person, no Black person in this country feels marginalized or disrespected or diminished in any way because of their hair or their race.
So the challenge is not everyone understands that race-based hair discrimination is a reality. And so we find ourselves constantly educating people, including lawmakers, to ensure that they understand that hair discrimination is racial discrimination. And so we are working collaboratively, the four of us championing this work together, along with the Crown Coalition, to ensure that race-based hair discrimination is outlawed nationwide.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
We make it very transparent to the shopper before they accept an order, what the order is going to look like, how much we're going to pay them, and how much the consumer is paying them. And so they can decide whether they take an order or whether they refuse it. And that's the kind of flexibility that our shoppers really value and the kind of transparency that they want.
Are you seeing a labor shortage right now? And what are you doing to combat that?
It's different in different places. Our demographic of shoppers is completely different from food delivery and ride sharing. We're 70% women and half of them are moms. And that's because a lot of the job at Instacart is very different than just being in a car with strangers. It's about going to the store, doing a good job of customer service, of really picking the right products for the consumer. And we are seeing that being very appealing to women.
So for somebody who's watching this and wants to be a successful global business leader, what are the skill sets?
I would prepare well before I got the job or was given the nod.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg?
That is a great question.
It's a great question.
Great question. Great question. Best question I get all night.
Bloomberg, top experts, great questions. From the heart of where innovation, money, and power collide, in Silicon Valley and beyond, this is Bloomberg Technology with Emily Chang.
I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up in the next hour, build your own bike. As Peloton looks to cut costs, the fitness company is planning a redesign so that customers can assemble their own bikes at home. Will customers spend for it? We'll discuss. Plus, activist investor Dan Loeb is calling for changes at Disney. Details on his new stake and why he is urging a spin-off of ESPN. And how Google Maps routinely misleads people searching for abortion clinics. Why, and why it's ever more critical in a post-Roe world. More on our Bloomberg analysis later this hour. We'll get to all of that in a moment, but first I want to get a look at the market. Stocks rising for a second trading day in a row. The tech-heavy NASDAQ 100 outperforming with Tesla, Apple, Microsoft, and NVIDIA leading the gains. Bloomberg's Christine Aquino joins us now for more. Christine, walk us through the day.
Well, Emily, you know, we started the week with bad news out of China coming in the form of a surprise rate cut and after some pretty big economic misses in July. But you really would not know that just looking at a price action in the U.S. equity market today. It's green across the board with the S&P 500 closing up 0.4 higher on the day. And that comes off a string of 4 weeks of gains already, and that's propelling that index up 18% from those year-to-date lows that we saw in June. And of course, the NASDAQ 100 also following in the S&P 500's footsteps, up even higher, about 0.7 on the day. And of course, the story of the day, or one of the big corporate stories of the day, is of course Disney. I know, Emily, you're going to be digging into that a little bit later, but it's making headlines today, as you mentioned, because of Dan Loeb and his company, Third Point, taking a stake in the company. He was very much not shy about suggesting some of those changes that he'd like to see to Disney CEO Bob Chapek, and some of them include a potential spinoff of the ESPN division. I know that you're going to be digging into that story for us later, Emily. And of course, the semiconductor index as well, rebounding toward the end of the day. That was down earlier, but finishing the day 0.3% higher. Now, if you take a look at some of those Chinese ADRs, you really will be hard-pressed to see as well the impact of the China news. Alibaba, of course, a key gauge of consumer sentiment, perhaps bearing the brunt of the pain, closing lower or trading lower by 0.6%. But then some of its more notable competitors, Pinduoduo and JD.com, both trading higher on the day. Pinduoduo, of course, the clear outperformer here, up more than 4%. But again, if you zoom out to the performance of China tech versus U.S. tech over the past year, you can really see that the divergence is very, very clear. We see that the Golden Dragon China Index, that's the NASDAQ Golden Dragon China Index, really still extending those gains. It's down 30% over the past year. Meanwhile, the NASDAQ 100, while it is still down on a one-year time frame, it has staged that recovery since the middle of June, and it has now pared those declines to just 10% over the past year. So I know we're going to be digging into some of those stories there, Emily. It is very much a feeling of summer markets here, but still lots to talk about.
All right, Christine, thank you very much. And to that Disney story, activist investor Dan Loeb urging Disney to make a sweeping set of changes to boost shareholder value, including new board members and spinning off ESPN. Loeb's Third Point taking what it calls a significant stake in Disney. Here to discuss, Paul Verna of Insider Intelligence and Bloomberg's Liana Baker. Liana, some of the changes that Dan Loeb is calling for here, not necessarily new ideas. I mean, we've heard talk about spinning off ESPN for years. What is Dan Loeb suggesting and why?
Well, that's right, Emily. In the letter, if you read it, Loeb actually says Disney might be working on some of these things already, although sources close to Disney tell me, there's not going to be an ESPN spinoff anytime soon. But some of the other things that Loeb is calling for, like cost cuts and buying a stake in Hulu from Comcast, these are things that investors have kind of been expecting for years. And this is Loeb's second bite of the apple at Disney. In 2020, remember, he had also taken a stake and asked for changes like Disney scrapping the dividend and putting all that investment into the streaming product. Those are things that Disney never really did. So we'll see if he has a better shot this time around. Loeb is a big name in the world of activist investing. He's shaken up companies like Yahoo and Sony over the years, but he does have a mixed track record as to really seeing the changes that he's asking for.
Loeb's letter to Disney initially starts off, fairly flattering to CEO Bob Chapek. Then he sort of digs in, saying ESPN is a great business that currently generates significant free cash flow. Despite these advantages, we believe a strong case can be made that ESPN should be spun off to shareholders with an appropriate debt load that'll alleviate leverage at the parent company. Disney responding, sort of thanks, not quite, but not quite no thanks, saying we welcome the views of all our investors as our results demonstrate the Walt Disney Company continues to deliver strong financial results powered by world-class storytelling and our unique and highly valuable content creation and distribution ecosystem. Paul, what do you make of this?
Well, I think it's always good to stir the pot. Dialogue is always helpful, and it's interesting to put out these ideas. But I don't think, if I were Bob Chapek, I'm keeping ESPN. I'm not spinning it off. ESPN does a lot of things for Disney. Sports, for one, it does a couple of things that no other form of entertainment does. One is You have loyalty. So, someone is more likely to tune out the next season of The Mandalorian if they don't like a plot twist or something about the casting, but they're not likely to just stop watching Major League Baseball or La Liga or whatever else they watch on ESPN. And then there's this whole thing about appointment viewing, which is something that's kind of a vestige to bygone days, but it still exists in sports because a game is taking place when it takes place and people want to watch it. So I think there's a lot of benefit to having ESPN as part of that portfolio. It's not an accident that every other media company that Disney competes with has a major sports entity as part of their mix.
Leanna, what do we know about Loeb's track record and how likely it is that he'll be successful here, especially with a company like Disney?
It's hard to say. There was a vaguely threatening line in the letter today where he said that there's a talent gap on Disney's board and that he has good connections and could maybe make some introductions to Disney. Now, I don't know, who Disney needs to meet that doesn't know already, but the idea there is that he's floating out with investors to see if they'll support him maybe in a board fight. So right now, Disney, their window for directors would open later this fall. So Loeb would have a few months to see if he wants to do a board fight. He really does have a mixed track record at taking over boards. At Yahoo, back in 2012, he had a lot of success, although history will tell whether, Marissa Mayer was the right move. At Sotheby's, the company went private, but it was a really long haul. It took several years, and Sony still hasn't made a lot of the changes he's wanted. So while he's a big name, it's not clear that, even though he's going after this blue chip company, that's a slam dunk that all of this will come true.
Gosh, I remember covering that Yahoo Loeb Marissa Mayer story every day for, at least a year. Paul, what do you make of some of these other changes? New board members, full ownership of Hulu. Again, as I said earlier, not necessarily new ideas, but something that several investors have been calling for a while, but hasn't happened.
Well, I think that Disney buying the share that it doesn't own in Hulu from Comcast is a good idea. So I agree with Dan Loeb on that one. There's a lot of tension within Disney because on the one hand, there's a deadline to execute this deal by 2024. So obviously it's in Disney's best interest for the price of that chunk to be as low as possible. So it's almost like a weird motivation to drive down the value of Hulu. And that's just a very tense situation that's going to unfold for the next couple of years. Disney already has a controlling interest in Hulu. And in my view, they're doing a great job with Hulu. I don't see that they should fold it into Disney Plus necessarily. I think it's a very strong brand on its own. So I see a lot of value in basically Disney executing on this earlier, even if, as Dan Loeb says, they have to pay a little bit of a premium for it.
All right, well, we're going to continue to follow this evolving story. We'll see how long it lasts. Bloomberg's Liana Baker, Paul Verna of Insider Intelligence. Thank you both. And more changes for Peloton after last week's layoffs and price hikes. Think DIY. The struggling fitness brand is retooling its bikes for self-assembly. Yes, that means customers will be able to put them together themselves. This is part of a wide-ranging turnaround for Peloton by its new CEO, Barry McCarthy, who's also planning to launch a rowing machine this year. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman covers all things Peloton for us. So let's get this straight. Peloton just raised prices for the bike. Now it wants customers to put the bikes together themselves?
Yeah, I wonder if Dan Loeb is going to try to get his hands on a Peloton as well, because clearly they have a lot of changes to implement here. So yes, one of the initiatives last week as part of the layoffs was really taking their costs and dropping them significantly when it comes to distribution and warehouses, right? So they're laying off over 500 people that work in distribution. Now, if you ever bought a Peloton before, this is how it works, and you know this already. You order it online, and they show up to your house, a white glove service. They bring it in, they unbox it for you, and they set it up for you. That's a $400 fee to consumers, and that's very expensive for the company to really supply and make happen. That's why they're winding down the warehouses. Right now, they're going to start moving to third-party companies, logistics companies, to do that white glove service. The next step is having consumers set these devices up themselves. So they're in the process right now, the CEO told me in an interview last week, of redesigning its equipment so they can ship it via UPS, via FedEx, whatever you want. You take it home, it arrives at your doorstep, you open the box, you put it together yourself. And like you said, DIY. That's obviously not a great customer experience compared to the white glove service, But that would be cheaper for the customer, no longer paying that $400 setup fee, be cheaper for Peloton. And if they have redesigned it in such a way where it's a 15-minute process, right, with just a few parts, it's actually pretty convenient rather than having people come into your house.
We've covered some of the safety issues with Peloton products. I mean, are there any safety issues with this?
Yeah, I mean, I have to tell you, obviously, if you set up a bike incorrectly or the rower or a treadmill incorrectly, right, and that thing falls apart because you didn't do a good job, setting up the device, that's a clear liability issue. So that really comes down to their engineering, their supply chain, their operations to figure out a way to make these devices work reliably and set up reliably, right? So if you have to have the equipment to do it, the right screwdriver, the right screws, that could be a complicated situation. So that is definitely a consideration. And I guess we just have to hope that Peloton has engineered these things so they could be set up quickly and safely.
You've also reported on products to come, a rowing machine. What else can we expect?
Yeah, so a rowing machine, that's the next major product from Peloton, other than this minor redesign of the bikes to allow for safe self-assembly. That Peloton rowing machine has been in the works for several years now. Barry McCarthy says they're finally probably going to launch it in the holiday season. He hinted at some supply chain snags related to COVID. So let's see if they're able to get that launched. They launched the Guide. That's a TV device that allows the TV device with a camera to follow along and really analyze your workouts and tell you how you're doing. After that, they've also been working on a machine similar to a tonal and another strength training machine. There's also wearables in the works. They have this heart rate monitor, so maybe they'll expand the wearables business as well. But what I really think is they need to really, probably make a cheaper bike, right? The cheapest bike right now is around $1,500. I think the sweet spot for something like this is probably south of $1,000. They've been pushing their refurbished model. Maybe they can make a really low-end, self-assemblable bike, maybe with a smaller display, less integrated technology, that could really compete with bikes from Echelon and other companies that are simply not charging as much as Peloton.
All right, interesting. We'll continue to follow your reporting on Peloton. Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, as always. Appreciate it. Meantime, Monday is the deadline for hedge funds to disclose their U.S. equity investments for the second quarter. This is one of the few ways that we get insight into how hedge funds and some large family offices actually invest. The hedge fund Duquesne bought Eli Lilly, CrowdStrike, Moderna, and Datadog. Meantime, Tiger Global took new positions in Alphabet and Zillow, according to a new 13F filing. Tiger Global also exited positions in DocuSign, Zoom, and Salesforce, reducing its stakes in Snowflake and Microsoft. Coming up, dozens of SPACs have fallen through this year, and there could be more to come. We'll tell you why next. This is Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's a community of global leaders and innovators who are blazing new trails to transform business and government. This platform will help them share their ideas with the world and provide access to the resources they need to bring them to life. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Big, expensive cities have a lot going for them. But if you live in one, you've probably noticed that these big, expensive cities keep getting more, well, expensive. You could always move away. You might have just started working remotely, so there's really nothing keeping you there. But then again, moving is a hassle. Well, what if someone paid you 10 grand to do it? What if they threw in free office space, a bicycle, or a gym membership? Programs in cities and states around the US are doing exactly that, and they're getting a lot of interest.
We've had over 50,000 applications.
About 90,000 applications.
We've had over 1,800 applicants from all over North America.
So are these nascent programs actually beneficial to their communities and the workers joining them? Or are they little more than flashy advertising campaigns for places looking for an injection of fresh talent?
The difference between endless research and a winning strategy. To improve your firm's productivity and profitability, Bloomberg Law combines the latest in AI-powered tools and in-depth analysis to accelerate the research process. to grow your practice and make better use of your valuable time. The difference is Bloomberg Law.
The SPAC world continues to unravel. At least 4 planned mergers to go public have been canceled since the market closed last Friday, bringing the year's tally to 42. Those concerns have pushed 89 backers to withdraw plans to raise fresh capital for blank checks. Here to explain, Bloomberg's Bailey Lipschultz. So, Bailey, just how many of these are we talking about here, and why are we seeing so many of them?
Yeah, so as you saw in the chart, that we've seen kind of a growing number that has only kind of shot up since the start of the year, and that's really coming as we've seen over 600 blank check companies on the hunt for deals that are racing against deadlines that either really are built up at the end of the first quarter of next year, some going into the second quarter of next year, but really just over 700 SPACs either with signed deals or chasing to find new target companies to bring public. When you look at some of the breakups that we've seen in the last few days, those are either in things like electronic vehicles, cryptocurrencies, so a lot of high growth technology companies that are ways away from generating any kind of EBITDA, and that's really something we've seen fall out broadly across the actual public markets. So that's part of the reason that the plug has been pulled on some of these deals.
So, talk to us about the broader market for SPACs and what this bodes for the rest of the year.
Yeah, so we've seen more than 60 actually close their deals so far this year, and another 100 are live deals. So that means that there actually is a partnership between the sponsorship team and the target company. So you can expect to continue to see some of these getting across the finish line. But the way these de-SPACs are trading, 2022 class is down a median 48% this year. So markedly underperforming the market, markedly underperforming those who went public via the traditional IPO. So you can expect to see some deals getting across the finish line, but there is expectations for liquidations like we saw with the Bill Ackman SPAC, like we saw Sam Zell announcing last week, in addition to expectations that we will see some of these deals being broken just because these terms were agreed to back in December, even through April, when the market was in very different shape compared to where it is right now, where there are so many concerns about a potential recession and what lies ahead with expectations for the Fed to continue to hike interest rates.
So, question, does this trend pick back up when or if, hopefully, the markets get better, or longer term, are investors just souring on this as a means of doing business?
Yeah, sponsors are really optimistic that they can get deals done. That's why we saw Chamath Palihapitiya announcing that they plan to push back 2 deadlines to sometime next year. Kind of the reading of the room from talking to investors is the idea that as the market rebounds, there will be some demand for some of these SPAC deals to get across the finish line for some of these experienced sponsors to find and bring private targets public. But the expectation from the people that I talk to is that the future iteration of SPACs in 2022 or in 2023 and in 2024 will really look like what it did back in 2019, where you've got 50 to 60 SPACs filing to go public. They're taking some of these smaller target companies public that maybe don't have the following to get a bank like a JP Morgan or a Goldman Sachs to underwrite their IPO, and will find ways to get deals across the finish line. But broadly speaking, the expectation is that the go-go days that we saw in 2020 and 2021 is very much a thing of the past and more of an anomaly.
All right, really interesting. Bailey Lipschultz, thank you for covering that story for us. All right, coming up, how conspiracy theorist Alex Jones made even more money after being taken down from major social media platforms. We're going to have more on that next. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Material samples brought back from objects in space can shed light on billions of years of our solar system's history, including details about the origin of life here on Earth.
A piece of an asteroid is a piece of the earliest beginnings of the solar system.
But picking up rocks from the surface of an asteroid or planetary satellite isn't as easy as it sounds. It requires voyages of millions of miles to bodies that have never been seen up close. Probes need to land on surfaces with weak gravitational pulls, where the surface terrain is completely unknown, gather samples, and then make the long trip back.
And while behemoths like NASA and SpaceX grab headlines, it's a relatively young space agency. The Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, better known as JAXA, that is taking the giant leap necessary to bring the mysteries of space back down to Earth.
From the world of politics to the world of business. Balance of Power with David Weston. News, analysis, insight from and about politics power players. Weekdays. This is Bloomberg.
In the summer of 2018, Apple, Facebook, Spotify, Twitter, and YouTube all banned the media company of conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, that is, InfoWars. That means taking down many of its recorded broadcasts, this after Jones threatened then special counsel Robert Mueller. The platforms all cited some sort of unspecified content policy violation for their decision to deplatform the controversial host, which was supposed to relegate Jones to relative obscurity. As it turns out, Jones's audience didn't quite disappear. In fact, his business became more lucrative than ever. Bloomberg's Max Chafkin took a deep dive into this for us. Max, how is this even possible?
Well, so there are two things that are going on. One is that although the big tech companies banned InfoWars pages and in some cases eventually banned Alex Jones, they didn't take down, they didn't stop the circulation of these Sandy Hook related conspiracy theories. They didn't stop other people from posting Jones's videos, either in support or in criticism of him. And as a result, even though he was banned, you've still seen quite a lot of Alex Jones on social media, either in the form of him appearing on podcasts. So you've seen a bunch of these kind of contrarian, edgy types like Joe Rogan have Alex Jones on their shows, and as well as just people out there criticizing him. And then the other thing that happened is that, Alex Jones used this and turned it into a storyline where he became this martyr. He does not make money through like a traditional media company does. He makes money by selling products. So there may be a situation where, although his audience, he's not getting the huge numbers, he's making more money off of the audience that he does have because he's been able to activate them by spinning this narrative of martyrdom, which, as we learned during the trial, it simply isn't true. He's doing really well financially.
You mentioned the trial, of course, judge awarding the parents of one of the Sandy Hook victims tens of millions of dollars. There's also a Texas verdict, another one coming up. Are these verdicts, these penalties, actually changing the narrative around him, or are they making him potentially more powerful?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, what you have a jury award in Texas. That's the $50 million you mentioned. You also have this case in Connecticut. In both of these cases, Jones has been found to have defamed the families, and you have trials to decide on the damages. And the thing is, it's very tempting even now to say, okay, well, this is probably the end of Alex Jones's career. He's gone too far. But people have been saying this for a long time. And, as I point out in the column, you still have lots of people, lots of companies basically enabling and making money off of this stuff. Alex Jones has a book that's coming out. It's near the top of Amazon's bestseller list. There's a documentary, a very sympathetic documentary that has just come out. So you have lots and lots of media types still kind of, like I said, eating off of these conspiracy theories in one way or another. And it's pretty depressing just because the cruelty, as we saw during the trial, of these conspiracy theories towards the parents was, it's disturbing.
Right. Ooh, yes. Well, you can read more of that in Max's story. Max, thank you for bringing that issue to light with us, and we'll be following the verdict from the upcoming trials. All right, coming up, new analysis from Bloomberg finds that Google Maps routinely misleads people looking for abortion clinics. We're going to have more on that later in the show. This is Bloomberg.
You will put a woman on Mars. You will bring forth global cooling. You will be the first chief crypto officer. Because when you subscribe to Bloomberg, you won't just get news. You'll get insight into limitless possibilities, knowledge, and inspiration to feed your ambition. So before you invent, pioneer, disrupt, before you change the world, Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's a community of global leaders and innovators who are blazing new trails to transform business and government. This platform will help them share their ideas with the world and provide access to the resources they need to bring them to life. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
The tag on the product may read Made in the USA, but the sign on the CEO's door often says Made in India. Alphabet's Sundar Pichai, Microsoft's Satya Nadella, IBM's Arvind Krishna, Micron Technology's Sanjay Mehrotra, and that's just the start. Add in the chief executives of Adobe, Deloitte, Gap, VMware, and that doesn't count Indians running companies all over the world. Why have so many Indians risen to the top? Vinod Khosla points to India's incredibly competitive education system. If you can survive the pressure it takes to get into one of the Indian institutes of technology, it gives you confidence to handle American universities and later the business world. Meanwhile, the belief in India's ability to produce so many tech wizards is reinforced every year. Indians make up about 3/4 of the immigrants receiving coveted H-1B visas for the U.S., and it's a safe bet that some of them will eventually find their way to the C-suite.
No one covers the world like Bloomberg.
There's a sense it'll get to 7% in the coming months. Do you see that coming through?
There was something of a grey zone battle between Taiwan and China.
Where are the job cuts to come from? We will not just cut and run.
With unmatched reach and resources from more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg, your global business authority. Everything you need to get set for the start of U.S. trading. Bloomberg The Open with Jonathan Farrell. Drilling down on the numbers and preparing you as only Bloomberg can. Weekdays on Bloomberg.
Ken Griffin is moving both Citadel and Citadel Securities to Miami. The scoop was broken by Bloomberg's Amanda Gordon.
We've been covering the changing digital privacy landscape in a post-Roe world, issues with access to information on abortion, and the power that tech companies have to safeguard that information. Well, it turns out that even Google Maps regularly misleads people searching for abortion clinics. This according to a new analysis by Bloomberg News. Let's take a deep dive on this with Bloomberg's Jack Gillum, who went through all of the data for us. So tell us what you found, Jack.
So, Emily, we wanted to just start out as if somebody wanted to find an abortion clinic, right? A very straightforward search that you would put into Google Maps. And when we did that for all 50 states and the District of Columbia, the results were pretty surprising. About a quarter of the cases returned not abortion clinics, but instead what are called crisis pregnancy centers. These places that are often, are encouraged, that encourage women when they come in to not get an abortion, and even though they often will masquerade themselves as a bona fide abortion clinic or some sort of doctor's office. This is very different than if you maybe type in a certain maybe fast food chain or type of restaurant, it'll give you alternatives. In this case, post-Roe, it's led to some confusion among folks that we've spoken with who believe Google, they see the result, they assume that it's an abortion clinic, they go there, and in some cases, they're in for a pretty alarming surprise.
What does this practically mean for those seeking an abortion?
So what it means is that if somebody is in need of this procedure and they go to one of these places and it's a crisis pregnancy center, they can be sort of drawn into this process and be told, sometimes with very erroneous medical information, that they don't need one. We spoke with one woman who in fact Googled an abortion clinic, who ended up going to a crisis pregnancy center, and then quickly realized that it was not an abortion clinic, was given a rubber fetus, confided in them that in fact she was in an abusive relationship, and they tried to convince her that if you just stay in this relationship with the baby, things will get better. So, I mean, it's unclear what sort of emotional damage that did to that woman and other people who are seeking, particularly if they are seeking an abortion. There might not be people who are up to date on this post-Roe world, and it really sort of raises questions in a quarter of these cases that we found, what happens when somebody is in need and when they search and get a wrong result.
What's Google doing about this?
So they say that they have extra layers of verification in place. They have policies, they say, that prevent this, and people can report these erroneous results. There's still the critics we've spoken to who ask, well, is Google doing enough, given that they want to index the world's information, and that some of these websites are pretty clear that they do not provide abortion? Is there a way to modify that algorithm and take those erroneous results into account?
All right, Jack Gillum, thanks for bringing that story to light. Appreciate it. Well, for more on the implications and the power of tech in a post-Roe world and the impact on tech, telehealth, tech investing at large, I want to bring in Susan Line, BBG Ventures managing partner, formerly an executive with AOL and Gilt Group, just to name a few. So, Susan, as we were talking about, tech platforms have incredible power in a post-Roe world, and obviously have some decisions to make about how they use that power. What are you most concerned about from the perspective of an investor as we see these issues play out?
That's a really good question. I actually think about it more as opportunities that exist. It's really clear that women are not being served, certainly in the 20 states that have banned abortion. But additionally, I think that there's going to be just a huge impact on business overall. And so that always creates opportunity. There will be founders out there who are looking for solutions that enable companies to really address the retention issues, the recruitment issues, and the challenges in a post-Roe era. I mean, there are 2 million fewer women in the workforce today than there were before COVID. So a lot of women left for multiple reasons: remote learning, daycare centers closing, and just the overall caregiver issues that fall to women. Those women have not come back. This new ruling is going to just exacerbate that. We are going to see fewer women in the workforce. We are going to see fewer women advancing at companies. And we all know that gender diverse teams perform better. So unless companies find a way to begin to mitigate this, I think we're going to have big challenges.
So how is this impacting your own investment thesis?
We back female and diverse founders who bring new thinking to sectors where a lot of change is overdue. So it's healthcare, work, finance, education, climate. And they're all areas where diverse founders have been traditionally overlooked. But one of the things we've learned during the 9 years we've been doing this, is that people with lived experience as well as learned experience, people who really understand the end users of a tech platform, the people whose lives are going to be better for it, are generally the people who are going to come up with better solutions. So it's really, for us, it's always looking a little bit ahead of where things are right now, to identify where the opportunities exist, and I think we're seeing them in multiple areas. Certainly telehealth. That's a really interesting arena right now. Look, in 2020, the restrictions on medication abortions, which used to demand that you go to a hospital or a healthcare provider in order to get prescriptions, that was lifted because of COVID, and those restrictions are still gone. So that opens the way for a whole new stream of telehealth solutions, companies that are both serving women in their own states, but also women nationally.
You mentioned the women that we've lost in the workforce post-pandemic, and there's been a big concern about female entrepreneurs also backsliding in the pandemic. You know, for example, in a tough market conditions, investors might go back to what they know and, you know, continue to back the sort of stereotypical idea of what a founder should look like, which is not necessarily a woman. Are you seeing evidence that female founders and entrepreneurs are, you know, at more of a disadvantage than they were at the start of 2020?
You know, I would say no. We have seen more female founders pitching this year than we did last year, more last year than we did the year before. I think part of the reason is that we invest early. We invest at seed stage, even sometimes pre-seed. Those rounds have been far less impacted by the market changes. And that's where you find most women playing too, right? They have not been doing this for long enough to have, you know, seen hundreds and hundreds of IPOs at this point. So I think for the time being, women are slightly advantaged by what's been happening nationally. In fact, the early part of 2022 saw an increase in the percent of rounds that were led by women.
What's your broader thesis about the market environment? Obviously, we know we're seeing lots of volatility in the public markets. You know, we're hearing the potential for the R word over and over again. We know it's impacted the private markets, that valuations are coming down. What are you seeing, and how concerned are you about the macro environment on the funding environment?
Yeah. Look, I think that early on, we told our founders to really think hard about how they were spending capital this year. Not a good time to have to go out and raise. If a company is doing really well and sees a path to really capitalize on this moment in order to grow sufficiently to do a giant round next year, that's great. We're all for that. But there are definitely going to be a number of companies that are good companies that just run out of cash this year because venture capital is investing far more slowly. And we've seen it multiple times now where rounds that ordinarily would have taken a month or 6 weeks are taking 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And that's rough on founders. That's rough on companies. And there are going to be companies that unfairly go under.
All right. Well, lots to continue to watch, Susan. Good to have you back on the show. It's been a while. BBG Ventures Managing Partner Susan Line. Thank you. Coming up, Galaxy Digital wants to end its acquisition of BitGo, but BitGo is fighting back. We'll tell you how. Next, this is Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's a community of global leaders and innovators who are blazing new trails to transform business and government. This platform will help them share their ideas with the world and provide access to the resources they need to bring them to life. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
make it very transparent to the shopper before they accept an order, what the order is going to look like, how much we're going to pay them, and how much like the consumer is paying them. And so they can decide whether they take an order or whether they refuse it. And that's the kind of flexibility that our shoppers really value and the kind of transparency that they want.
Are you seeing a labor shortage right now? And what are you doing to combat that?
It's different in different places. Our demographic of shoppers is completely different from food delivery and ride sharing. We're 70% women and half of them are moms. And that's because a lot of the job at Instacart is very different than just being in a car with strangers. It's about like going to the store, doing a good job of customer service, of really picking the right products for the consumer. And we are seeing that being very appealing to women.
The top names at the Fed are on Bloomberg.
I have a baseline case going into September that is 50 basis points. That's where I've been since the last meeting. But I have an open mind about whether 75 is going to be necessary. 50, 75 doesn't just depend on a data point, even an important one like the CPI. I like to say that we're data dependent, we're not data point dependent.
Nobody covers the Fed like Bloomberg, your global business authority.
Elon Musk isn't the only one walking away from deals. In the crypto world, Mike Novogratz's Galaxy Digital now says it's terminating its acquisition of BitGo, $1.2 billion deal there, citing BitGo's failure to deliver audited financial statements for 2021 by a deadline. Let's get all into this with our crypto contributor, Shonali Basek. And Shonali, BitGo is fighting back.
Oh, they certainly are, and it's a really interesting deal to look at. Emily, this is one of the largest we've seen in the crypto universe, Galaxy Digital's $1.2 billion agreement, and they've been waiting, the industry, investors have been waiting a long time for this deal to close. Now we know that Galaxy is looking to terminate this deal, and BitGo wants them to pay that termination fee. If you look at the statements here by BitGo's lawyers, they're saying that it's pretty audacious that Mike Novogratz and Galaxy would go blaming BitGo on this merger. They call it absurd, and this is according to the Quinn Emanuel partner from BitGo's legal team here. Both Galaxy and Mr. Novogratz have been distracted, they say, by the Luna fiasco. Either Galaxy owes BitGo a $100 million termination fee as promised, or it has been acting in bad faith and faces damages of that much or more. So again, Emily, kind of like Twitter here, it's not easy to terminate a deal. While Galaxy's shares have been under pressure, they are up on the day, so you do see investors really applauding the decision to let go of what would have been much more expensive last year than this year.
All right, hang on, Shonali. I want to get into this and more with Kavita Gupta, general partner at Delta Blockchain Fund, a venture capital firm that focuses on blockchain tech, DeFi, NFTs, play to earn, and more. Kavita, drama. What do you make of this latest development and Novogratz trying to get out of this deal?
I genuinely feel like if anybody who is in the VC space would look at the deal and say, hey, the valuations are different from the time the conversation started, took longer than for it to close. Also, after the Luna fiasco, do we really have cash on the balance sheet to do it? I mean, of course, they blame that for SEC filing, they needed some certain more documents, which is very easily provable by the exchange of emails, so could have never been reached here if there was ever an intention of actually doing the deal. I genuinely feel it's the market sentiments than anything else, whether Galaxy can afford it, does need it at the same valuation, or does it even make sense with the business they are going forward with?
You know, I'm so curious about what you think this means for deal making moving forward. This was such a massive deal in the space. A lot had to be said about confidence with a deal like this getting broken up. On the other hand, you look at the investment banks, including Galaxy's, and they seem to be busy. But are these deals born out of a market that is trying to restructure, or deals born out of a chance to build a stronger market at the end?
I feel like it's everywhere, right? So you have deals which is like Coinbase is making with institutional accounts to be able to help them have their private wealth managers do direct crypto ownership. So I feel like the infrastructure play is going on with respect to crypto companies which are which exist at a very big level. But acquisition offers, if the valuation is still the old valuation, people are backing out. We have been seeing that since the Luna fiasco. Even at the smallest level, so many funds who have committed the money into early stage investments have also asked money or disappeared or backed out or asked for lower valuations. So we have been seeing it for last couple of months continuously. We have seen the shift in the valuations in a massive way, but I think this is one of those cases where the valuation is still the old build and the deal has to be done in the market where you can get a better deal.
Another deal in the market that is worth talking about is this idea that you can pay through Reddit for a way to purchase Ethereum through an integration with FTX. You know, FTX is into stocks, FTX is into crypto, but what does something like Reddit do for them? Do we think that more social media platforms will partner with companies like this to get the job done?
Yeah, and I think this is not the first one. Twitter did it already. They just did it with Bitcoin. I think we're going to see more and more Web2 adoption. When you say fintech, there will be an extra layer of payment through blockchain if you directly want to go there. And that is also the idea of the KYC and exchanges coming and getting new customers. Like, how are you going to get them? And I think it's a very smart way FTX is coming. And not only working with social media platform, but any payment, any place where you have an e-commerce option to be done, just add another crypto payment system out there.
All right, Kavita, thank you so much for joining us. Always great to have your take on the latest dramatic twists in the crypto business. Kavita Gupta, Delta Blockchain Fund, along with our very own Shanali Basic. Coming up, Snapchat's 1 million paid, yes, paid subscribers. What that means for the social giant's efforts to move away from advertising. We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Big, expensive cities have a lot going for them. But if you live in one, you've probably noticed that these big, expensive cities keep getting more, well, expensive. You could always move away. You might have just started working remotely, so there's really nothing keeping you there. But then again, moving is a hassle. Well, what if someone paid you 10 grand to do it? What if they threw in free office space, a bicycle, or a gym membership? Programs in cities and states around the US are doing exactly that, and they're getting a lot of interest.
We've had over 50,000 applications.
About 90,000 applications.
We've had over 1,800 applicants from all over North America.
So are these nascent programs actually beneficial to their communities and the workers joining them? Or are they little more than flashy advertising campaigns for places looking for an injection of fresh talent?
Snap says its paid subscription plan is a hit with more than 1 million users across the globe. The company launched Snapchat Plus back in June, a plan that gives users early and exclusive access to features for $3.99 a month, including changing the app icon and seeing who rewatched your story. Let's bring in our own Alex Barinka for more on this. So kind of surprising that Snap was able to rack up this many paying subscribers. What exactly are they so excited about?
Yeah, and doing it in just 6 weeks since this product has launched. So a lot of these subscribers are, you can probably assume, the younger users that Snap has brought onto the platform and tried to give them interesting, exclusive new ways to monetize. 1 million, Emily, it's a number that surprised me, but it'll also probably be a surprising but important number for Snap as they move forward and look for revenue streams outside of kind of their beleaguered ad business.
So, how quickly and how much do you think Snap can expand this?
I can tell you that this is what they're focused on right now. If you remember their last earnings report just over a month ago, they got hammered in the markets. They basically came out and said, our advertisers aren't spending money on the platform. We're seeing a lot of softness on that side of the business. When you think about Snap, there's 2 places they can really make money. It's the advertisers, and then it's users, like this with Snapchat Plus. Now, in the social media industry, we know historically it's been pretty tough to get users to pay up. So this seems to be kind of an early win for Snap. Historically, this is a company that's been really good at rolling out products that they know their users would love, and it seems like they're finding a little bit of a winning ticket here, which again, as advertisers tend to be a little bit pocketbook shy right now, will be a potential important revenue stream for them going forward.
Okay, so are other social media companies going to try to do this, and is it going to work? I mean, Roger McNamee, early Facebook investor, has been pushing for a subscription model at Facebook for years. You know, could Instagram do this, or TikTok?
I think the question will be, what value can they provide? So Snap is giving people like the ability to get to the front of the line in a celebrity's DMs when you direct message them. When you look at Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, right now it seems like they're rolling out some other user-focused things that are not monetizable, like algorithmically driven feeds or focusing on different types of content. So I do think this is a place where Snap is unique. It's smaller. It's a bit of a different platform than those other names that you mentioned. And again, they've been laser focused on kind of doing things, maybe zagging when everyone else is zigging, focusing on peer-to-peer messaging when everyone else is focusing on broadcasting messages to the world. So probably a unique case here. We've seen the likes of like Twitter flirt with this a little bit, but we haven't seen any news really of somebody getting to 1 million users paying for something within a social media platform.
So this is my next question. What is going to continue to differentiate Snapchat in a sea of other options?
Yeah, so Snap has been focused around kind of this idea of a camera company, and that seems to be kind of where they're sitting. Ways to create content, their filters and their lenses continue to be differentiated, even though you see TikTok kind of creeping up on them. Also, they spend a lot of time really focusing on person-to-person communication, which again is not necessarily the main feed or the home feed on a lot of other apps. Snap also, again, kind of is winning over this younger market. Now, Emily, I will remind folks that Snap is a much smaller user base than what we see out there. Their revenue is a lot smaller than giants like Meta and Facebook and Instagram. That being said, it does seem like they are kind of really zeroing in on what that younger 18 to 24-year-old demographic wants and catering to how they want to talk and spend time with their friends one-on-one instead of just broadcasting content to the world.
So 1 million in 2 months, does that mean 12 million in a year?
We'll see. Back of napkin math, that's like 48 million a year at the current number if everyone's paying every month. 1% of revenue there, Emily, but we'll see if those numbers shake out and if folks stick around paying $4 a month for these extra features.
Okay, Alex Barinka, as always, thank you for stopping by. And that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology Tuesday. We're going to be talking about investing in clean energy with Jason Kelly, Ginkgo Bioworks, as President Biden signs the Inflation Reduction Act. And don't forget to check out our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
AI is the chance of humankind to really understand itself. How much of that is true? How confident? Did you actually overachieve? Did you back then realize that we would be using AI in many different jobs? Was it slower or faster than you thought at the time?
I think if I had a 35 or 40-year prediction task, I would have been more or less on track as to where we are today. But I would have predicted steady linear increase over time. But instead, the field had very minimal improvements until the last 5 or 10 years. Then it really took off. I think we ended up in the right place, but I was very wrong about the trajectory. To this date, we still know very little about how the brain works, but these machines are getting ever more powerful. And I feel in some sense, we did end up learning what human intelligence is by learning what it is not. If we exclude all the things machines can do better than us as what makes us unique in our human intelligence, then now we can rule out many, many things, because AI or machine learning has become so good at so many things that what's left must be the key aspects of human intelligence.
Material samples brought back from objects in space can shed light on billions of years of our solar system's history, including details about the origin of life here on Earth.
A piece of an asteroid is a piece of the earliest beginnings of the solar system.
But picking up rocks from the surface of an asteroid or planetary satellite isn't as easy as it sounds. It requires voyages of millions of miles to bodies that have never been seen up close. Probes need to land on surfaces with weak gravitational pulls, where the surface terrain is completely unknown, gather samples, and then make the long trip back. And while behemoths like NASA and SpaceX grab headlines, it's a relatively young space agency. The Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, better known as JAXA, that is taking the giant leap necessary to bring the mysteries of space back down to Earth.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East. Our top stories this morning. As growth momentum slows in China, calls for further policy support gets louder, with even a PBOC-backed paper saying action is needed. Meanwhile, China's military launches fresh exercises around Taiwan over another U.S. congressional visit. Singapore's next prime minister warns Beijing and Washington may sleepwalk into conflict.
We are starting to see a series of decisions being taken by both countries that will lead us into more and more dangerous territory.
Iran signals it may be near a nuclear deal as it sends the European Union its official response to the bloc's proposal for reviving the 2015 accord. And the latest 13F filings show Stanley Druckenmiller dumping his entire $200 million position in Amazon, but George Soros does the opposite as he increases his stake in the online retail giant. It's just gone 8 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Yusuf Gaminuddin in Dubai. Manish Krani is on the road again, but I'm looking here at the stock story, at the setup for the trading day, and it's really about what the U.S. was able to pull off on the equity side, defying the gloom that came in the New York manufacturing numbers and on the China data front at the moment. Called a little bit lower on the S&P 500 mini, but I'm looking also at the Bank of America note. They're saying that the quantitative tightening is going to shave 7% off the S&P 500. They looked at the correlation between the two, between 2010 and 2019 in terms of the Fed's bond purchases. This is what they've come up with. And I also want to get to some of the 13F filings. One that stood out to me was from Michael Burry from Scion, a hedge fund. They basically cut their long stock holdings to just one. They dropped 11 stocks in the second quarter. That includes Alphabet and Meta. So that what's left is this private person operator known as the Geo Group. Scion held about $165 million at the end of the second quarter. The man himself has declined to comment on the filings. Geo Group up about 10.6% in the last trading session. We'll get more into some of the other 13F filings shortly, but quick look at what's happening with treasuries. Holding gains despite the stock rally. We have strong appetite from investors outside of the United States. U.S. tends at 277. Treasury bill buyers once again backed away from 3- and 6-month bill auctions. Let's flip the board again. Quick look here at the energy story in crude oil. Wow, extending losses as Iran edges closer to a deal. We lost about $5 on the benchmark contracts in 5 hours. Libya also pumping more, so much to factor in. Let's also head out to the markets in Asia and get the full picture there. Juliet Saleh joins us as always from our Singapore studio. Good morning, Jules.
Hey, Yusuf. Well, all these signs of course, a global slowdown weighing in on sentiment, but Asian stocks holding up pretty well. We've had 4 sessions of gains and we're fairly flat on the regional benchmark index with some support coming through from China and Hong Kong, helping to offset some of the weakness elsewhere. You're particularly seeing China developer stocks rally. This is on this possible move to let state-owned firms guarantee the sale of new onshore notes. Now, we're still continuing to see a rally in Chinese bonds and weakness in the yuan after that surprise cut from the PBOC yesterday. And Mark Cranfield puts it really well in terms of the interest in Chinese bonds. Look, you've got COVID restrictions pretty much back to where they were at the onset of the pandemic. And then, of course, you've also got these very concerning worries about the state of the Chinese economy. We're also looking at bond futures, or bonds, I should say, in Australia rallying this after the RBA signalled further rate hikes ahead in its minutes from the August meeting. And let's have a look at my chart now, because we had BHP shares. They're rising the most since January 2021 after a beat on its underlying profit, and this comes on the back of the likes of BlueScope, which also came out with some good numbers and helping to propel Australian stocks to a 2-month high. So when you look at some of the earnings revisions you're seeing from Down Under, because of their exposure to the energy and commodity market, they are starting to outperform some of the earnings that we're seeing across the rest of the APAC region. Yusuf.
Jules, thank you very much, Juliet Saleh. I want to get to a red headline hitting the Bloomberg here. This is from Elliott Investment Management. They've dumped most, or almost all rather, of their position in SoftBank. This is according to the Financial Times. The SoftBank company has been going through a lot of turbulence in the last few weeks, especially after the last quarterly earnings announcement. We will try and get more details on that particular news peg. Let's shift gears now and get to calls for further policy support, because those are getting louder in China, right? So in order to stabilize the weakening growth momentum. But even as the PBOC-backed newspaper says in a front-page report this morning that action is needed, let's get out to our chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Engel in Hong Kong. So, Stephen, what exactly are economists saying at this point, and how do the two narratives stack up?
Yeah, well, this is potentially one way the Central Bank of China can telegraph what they might be doing in the future when they, the newspaper, the Financial News, which is a PBOC-backed newspaper, does a front-page large article quoting independent economists in China as saying they need to employ, the PBOC and other authorities need to employ more tools to, put some ground on this losing momentum economy and bolster growth, because the COVID zero policy policies obviously have sapped a lot of growth. Obviously, the property sector problems have sapped a lot of potential growth. It's a big pillar of the Chinese economy, and they just can't find necessarily enough export demand abroad to lift the economy. And there's definitely not enough domestic demand, with those retail sales numbers really missing the mark for July in those numbers yesterday. Alarming is how one economist put those numbers. But the market has been looking less at the actual July figures that we got yesterday, because everyone who covers China and is in China knows the economy is sputtering. What they need now is more easing or more policy directives. We got those two cuts, fairly minor cuts to the MLF, the medium-term lending facility, as well as the reverse repos yesterday. Now the calls, including that front page of the Financial News, calling for more action. Could there be a loan prime rate cut at banks? That could potentially help mortgages. But then again, other economists we've talked to, like Iris Pang over at ING, she essentially says that, you know, that's not necessarily going to spur people buying houses, because the confidence in the housing sector right now is pretty low. And I liken it, Yusuf, to you can cut mortgage rates all you want for people to buy a house, but they're not going to buy a hole in the ground with no prospect of that hole turning into an actual deliverable apartment. So things are going tough, and they want more policy directives. That's the consensus, it seems, from economists.
I always have respect for people who openly speak their mind about the economic data in China. No easy feat for sure. Steve, thank you. Great catching up. That's Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Engel. Let's get to the U.S. now. Back to these 13F filings, as they have come in for the second quarter, showing how top money managers were positioning as stocks entered a bear market. Bloomberg's Sue Keenan is joining us with the highlights. So, Sue, what are some of the themes that stood out to you?
Well, risk management was obviously a key theme. A lot of these funds ended up selling a lot of their tech positions, and it appears that many also were buying on the dips. And one of the stocks that many of the funds were buying was Alphabet. It was a popular buy the dip option, got scooped up by some of the very big names. By the way, so did Amazon.com, which you might recall fell 35% during the quarter. Big funds like D1 Capital, Co2, Maverick, Lone Pine, and George Soros' investment firm all increased their Amazon stakes. As mentioned, Soros was increasing his tech stakes. Big focus on Stanley Druckenmiller's Duquesne family office, which was doing the opposite, dumped a lot of its tech, while it also did buying Eli Lilly, CrowdStrike, Moderna. But notably, Druckenmiller's fund sold his entire $199 million position in Amazon.com, while also cutting back his stake in Microsoft. Dumped a lot of tech in the first quarter, too, selling a lot of Alphabet. You're looking at some of the big stocks to watch in these filings that keep coming up, and yes, they are tech stocks. We should also add to that list Alibaba and JD.com. A lot of funds were either selling or adding. Bridgewater exited Alibaba and JD.com. Co2 added to holding in those same stocks. It's interesting to note that many of these funds managed to add back tech just weeks before tech spiked and rebounded on the view that the Fed may not be hiking as aggressively as originally thought.
Sure, and then there's also the transaction with Michael Burry's fund. I talked a little bit about it at the top at the show. But of course, this is the man who rose to prominence after betting against mortgages in the run-up to, the 2008 financial crisis?
Yes, he made a lot of money by betting against the mortgage market. Interestingly enough, as you mentioned at the top of the show, he sold all 11 long positions that he had in stocks like Alphabet and Meta. His loan purchase in the quarter was a $3.3 million stake in the private prison operator Geo Group, going long on crime, you could say. The filing from Chase Coleman's Tiger Global also getting a lot of attention. The hedge fund lost half its value in the first half of the year. It sold stakes in Zoom, Salesforce, DocuSign, and took new positions in Alphabet and Zillow, among others. Interesting to see how this fund performs for the rest of the year as it is repositioned. Again, it's one of the funds that took a major beating in the tech sell-off early this year.
Sue, fantastic to see you. Thanks for that. That's Sue Keenan in New York. I want to get back to the red headline we had about 4 or 5 minutes ago. This was on SoftBank. Basically, Elliott Investment Management is dumping almost all of their stake in SoftBank. This is according to the Financial Times. At one point, they held about $2.5 billion in the group. This is according to the Financial Times. The exact size and timing of the sell down could not be learned, but the Financial Times understands that it took place earlier this year. The stock is getting quite a beating off the back of the news. A straight line down. Intraday, we are currently lower by about 2%. Again, it's been a very difficult few weeks for the heavyweight Japanese lender as it tries to fight various fronts across its revenue businesses. Let's get to the first word headlines as well from around the world and back out to Jules in Singapore.
Thanks, Yusuf. The Justice Department says it opposes the release of an FBI affidavit justifying a search warrant used to remove documents from Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida last week. The DOJ says the affidavit contains highly sensitive information about witnesses and should remain sealed to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation. Releasing an affidavit at this stage would be highly unusual. Iran has sent the European Union its official response to the bloc's proposal for reviving the 2015 nuclear accord. The EU brokered deal would ease sanctions, potentially restoring Iranian oil exports to the global market. Tehran expects to hear back from negotiators in the next 2 days. Iranian officials earlier signalled that an agreement can be reached if the US shows flexibility. Myanmar's deposed leader Aung San Suu Kyi has been sentenced to 6 more years in prison. According to Bloomberg sources, a special court found her guilty of 4 corruption charges related to a charity named after her late mother. The latest verdict brings her total jail term to 17 years, ending any chance of her staging a political comeback while the junta remain in power. And William Ruto has been declared the winner of Kenya's presidential election by a razor-thin margin against 5-time contender Raila Odinga. Ruto's pledge to rein in debt and support entrepreneurs and farmers helped him garner 50.5% of the valid votes. Chaos erupted shortly before the results announcement, as 4 of the nation's 7 electoral commissioners rejected the outcome. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg. Yusuf.
Thanks, Jules. Well, let's get you all a bit of a preview of what else is to come on the show. We're just getting warmed up as we get the outlook on GCC markets with the ADCD chief economist Monica Malik, and that's amid the drop in oil prices. But up next, we discuss the chances of a recession with Northern Trust's Wouter Sterkenboom as we await those Fed minutes. This is Bloomberg.
Some bonds last a lifetime. Some bonds inspire confidence. And some you grow to rely on. These are the bonds worth investing in. For over 50 years, PIMCO has reinvented fixed income to create opportunities for investors in every market environment. So no matter what happens, you can build the bonds that mean the most to you. PIMCO, a global leader in active fixed income.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
I don't have any investors. All this is all money in. This is me going out and hustling, bringing that money back, and just building it. You gotta think about a person that was homeless at one point, didn't really have any money coming in. The fact that this person was relentless and just determined to succeed and not let rock bottom define him as an individual. I can take things and put them together and take them apart and make them better and put them back together. I respect the craft, so I don't want to minimize and disrespect the value of each step of the craft and do by machine what should be done by hand.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
From the world of politics politics to the world of business. Balance of Power with David Weston. News, analysis, insight from and about politics power players. Weekdays, this is Bloomberg.
So markets expecting a pivot in the Fed cutting rates next year, to me sounds delusional. But even if you were at 3.8 with inflation still well above target, around 8%, falling only gradually, core inflation around 6-ish, you're still in negative territory. So the Fed funds rate should be going well above 4%, 4.5% to 5% in my view, to really push inflation towards 2%.
Nouriel Roubini weighing in there on the Fed's inflation fight. We should get more clues on the central bank's next moves when the FOMC minutes are released tomorrow night. Meanwhile, Bank of America is reminding investors that the Fed's quantitative tightening is still happening. Could shave as much as 7% off the S&P 500. Let's bring in Wouter Sturkenburg. He's the chief investment strategist for EMEA and APAC at Northern Trust Asset Management. Wouter, what do you make of the comments of Nouriel Roubini? Do we have to get to 4 to 5% of a Fed's fund rate for really to there to be a meaningful adjustment to some of the cost pressures?
Well, we're not quite there, to be honest. We think another 100 basis points in Fed rate hikes is a more gradual, more appropriate pace, especially because quantitative tightening and a strong dollar are also delivering incremental tightening to the U.S. economy. So we don't think we need to push that high to get inflation down. I think the real debate around inflation now is not so much how do we get from 8.5 to 5. People sort of see that the combination of higher rates, economic slowdown, and base level effects will get us there. The real debate is how do we get from 5 to 2, and that's of course where the challenge is a little bit bigger and where the uncertainty around that Fed funds rate, particularly sort of around the midpoint of 2023, is more elevated.
I noticed you didn't mention anything on Fed minutes, so I'm going to follow up on that. Are the Fed minutes going to be pretty much a non-event as far as the direction goes for both markets and expectations of what the Fed's going to do?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I do think the Fed minutes will be closely watched. At the moment, we are all very closely watching the economic data as it comes in, as well as any signs from the Fed as to how it will respond to that data, both inflationary-wise as well as growth-wise. So we will watch those minutes closely, and we'll, of course, particularly watch how the balance within the committee is with respect to future rate hikes, especially those 75 basis point ones that are currently still in the mix for the next meeting, right? The market is pricing in roughly 2.5 at the moment. So it's sort of in the middle between 2 and 3. So we will watch those closely. The Jackson Hole conference is coming up pretty soon as well. That will be watched very closely as well. But I think when it comes to the path for, let's say, the first half of 2023, I think we will see the Fed slow down. We do think we don't need to push quite as high as what Roubini was saying in the segment earlier, because the combination of a growth slowdown, higher dollar, quantitative tightening, and the rate hikes we've already seen will get inflation down to at least below 5%, and then we'll see how the economy responds after that.
Here's something that keeps coming up, and it's the performance of high yield in the United States. And there are various benchmark tickers you can look at, you know, your high yield indexes, your ETFs, whatever that may be. But either way, it's a story of a successful strengthening throughout the summer. You still on board with that trade? Is that something where investors should continue to get exposure in?
Yes, high yield continues to be our most favorite risk asset. It's our biggest overweight in our portfolio. And we have, of course, been happy to see the rebound over the last 5 to 6 weeks. And it's been a strong rebound, some of the best returns we've seen in the history in high yield, really driven by the fact that the inflation concerns have been abating. That's been a very important driver for the high yield market, because of course that takes a little bit of the sting out of the expectation side from a Fed perspective. And that's been very key to this market and to the functioning of the market as well, because of course there's also an important focus on the liquidity and the trading that happens underneath the surface here. So we're still in favor of this market, and we're still quite overweight as well.
A lot of analysis on the latest batch of China data. It rocked the world. Implications for both the near and the longer term. What is your conclusion? How does that affect asset allocation?
Yeah, clearly a disappointing set of data. We have been worried about the Chinese growth outlook. We've been underweight emerging market equities almost all year on the back of those worries. And of course, the combination of COVID policies as well as the property sector worries were an important driver of that. However, it doesn't just stop in China. It's clearly a very big economy that has reverberations around the world. And that's the part that we've become a little bit more focused on. The growth slowdown in China, how does it impact global growth? How does it impact European growth, which is already slowing down of its own volition because of the high energy prices? And how is that going to percolate towards the US, which normally is more insulated from these forces, but clearly is also showing a slowing growth momentum. So there's two aspects to this story. One, that we see confirmation of our worries around Chinese growth. And secondly, we see confirmation that global growth is slowing down and that the recession odds, even in the US, remain at 50-50.
So where's the best place to hide then as the rest of the world kind of begins to factor in a Chinese economy that no longer is pumping out as many goods and services with as much enthusiasm as before? I mean, that's a wake-up call.
It is a little bit of a wake-up call. It's also, of course, something that is not happening in a vacuum. The Chinese government, as we saw with the rate cut, does have levers it can pull to stimulate the economy and to sort of take the worst of the slowdown away. Same for the property sector. It just hasn't been doing that. It's been maneuvering very carefully around these trends. And that can change. If it feels that it needs to move more aggressively, it could. At the same time, in the current circumstances where the slowdown is pretty well embedded, I think we simply have to recognize that global growth is going to slow down, which positions us a bit more towards the growth side of the equity spectrum versus the value side, because growth tends to do a little bit better in economic slowdowns. And of course, it means that from a monetary policy perspective, we expect a little bit less from central banks than what is currently priced in.
Wouter, I know you've got to head out, so thanks for sharing some of those insights. It's Wouter Sturkenboom. He's the Chief Investment Strategist for EMEA and APAC at Northern Trust Asset Management. So much more to come on the program. This is Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's a community of global leaders and innovators who are blazing new trails to transform business and government. This platform will help them share their ideas with the world and provide access.
And our point was Wyoming can be that venue for blockchain enterprise, for crypto.
It's not the Wyoming way to sit around and wait for change. We want that independence, we want that freedom, we want that individuality. And that's a common theme that brings together bipartisan support for this in Wyoming.
We want to make sure that people understand, especially in Wyoming, but as the United States as a whole, this trend is coming. It's not going to stop. This is more of a small town that's growing into what I would call the cryptocurrency version of Silicon Valley.
It's the philosophy of that rugged individualism, the independence, and the ability to really get things done for yourself and control your own destiny. You get that from a blockchain, and you don't get that without it.
Let's get you a quick check of the latest business flash headlines. A Delaware court has ruled that Twitter does not have to hand over names of employees that Elon Musk believes are key witnesses in their ongoing legal battle Musk had asked the judge to force Twitter to identify the workers responsible for evaluating bot accounts. The court mostly denied Musk's request, but did order the social media giant to provide documents from its former head of consumer product. Activist investor Dan Loeb says his Third Point firm has acquired what he calls a significant stake in Disney and is now urging sweeping changes at the entertainment giant. In a letter to the CEO, Bob Chapek, Loeb suggests a spin-off of the ESPN Sports Network and a board shakeup. Disney says in a statement that it welcomes the views of all investors. And Paramount has reached a deal with Walmart to offer its streaming services to subscribers of the retail's membership program. Walmart Plus members will have access to an ad-supported plan of Paramount Plus at no additional cost. The offering may bolster the retail giant's appeal as it tries to win customers from Amazon, which offers Prime Video to its members. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's get you an overview then of how Middle East markets fared with the oil price tanking a little bit earlier in the afternoon on that trading day. This was the picture with the Saudi benchmark bucking the trend. Broadly, we're down in the Gulf, but 0.25% for the Saudi Tadawul, with a little bit of upside in Dubai. I think what really caught my eye were some of the earnings, and particularly in Saudi Arabia. Let's talk about Ma'aden, because the miner extending gains on, quote, very good results. Top-line growth driven by higher sales volume. So think about some of the basic commodities here and some of the, downstream products. So ammonia, phosphate, fertilizer, primary aluminum. The stock closing 7.9% higher intraday. So that is going to be something that will continue to feed into sentiment when the trade opens later on today. I want to get to equity futures in the United States, get you a bit of a snapshot then of where we are with sentiment. After bucking the consensus on sentiment yesterday with the economic data on New York manufacturing, now just a little bit lower, 0.1%. This is Bloomberg.
You will put a woman on Mars. You will be the first chief crypto officer, because when you subscribe to Bloomberg, you won't just get news. You will get insight into limitless possibilities. Before you change the world, Bloomberg.
At Bloomberg, we believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. It's a community of global leaders and innovators who are blazing new trails to transform business and government. This platform will help them share their ideas with the world and provide access to the resources they need to bring them to life. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Improve your firm's productivity and profitability, Bloomberg Law combines the latest in AI-powered tools and in-depth analysis to accelerate the research process. To grow your practice and make better use of your valuable time. The difference is Bloomberg Law.
On the David Rubenstein Show, Peer-to-Peer Conversations, I uncover the untold stories of the world's most successful leaders. Watch Wednesdays on Bloomberg Television.
I think that it's hard to put your head around any narrative. Let's just be honest. We've had sort of a shift in, are we in some sort of stagflation fears moment? People were talking about that all day yesterday.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East. Our top stories this morning. As growth momentum slows in China, calls for further policy support get louder, even with a PBOC-backed paper saying action is needed. Meanwhile, China's military launches fresh exercises around Taiwan over another U.S. congressional visit. Singapore's next prime minister warns Beijing and Washington may sleepwalk into conflict.
We are starting to see a series of decisions being taken by both countries that will lead us into more and more dangerous territory.
Iran signals it may be near a nuclear deal as it sends the European Union its official response to the bloc's proposal for reviving the 2015 accord. And the latest 13F filings show Stanley Druckenmiller dumping his entire $200 million position in Amazon. But George Soros, on the other hand, does the opposite. He increased his stake in the online retail giant. Let's circle back on the markets in Asia. We've got a lot to get through. Juliet Saleh joins us for all those details from our Singapore studio. Again, Jules.
Hey, indeed we do, Yusuf. Look, we're seeing pretty flat line on the MSCI Asia Pacific Index. Japan coming off some of those very solid gains you saw yesterday. Australia a front runner, and Hong Kong and China markets just slightly higher on the lunch break. But again, we are watching what is happening in the bond space, particularly this rally you are seeing in Chinese bonds. Yields have been falling the most since early 2020, and this after we had that surprise cut coming through from the PBOC yesterday as well. Do Chinese bonds look more attractive now, considering the state of the economy and the fact that COVID lockdowns are pretty much among the strictest that they have been throughout the entire pandemic? We are also seeing the PBOC set that weaker fixing after the yuan tumbled to a 3-month low, and you are seeing weakness across most of the Asian currencies today. Elsewhere, Australian bonds rallying, and that's after we had an update from the RBA. They continue to reiterate, look, they are not on a set path. They're watching the data. They're being data dependent, like the Fed has indicated as well. But they did indicate that further rate hikes in Australia are coming, Yusuf.
And then from monetary policy to some of the corporate stories, we're watching the sour, SoftBank and BHP specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. You broke that news earlier that we are hearing from the Financial Times that the hedge fund Elliott Management has dumped almost all its position in SoftBank. You are seeing SoftBank shares down, but off the earlier lows when this initial news hit the tape. We don't have any further clarification from that FT report other than a person familiar indicating that the exact size and timing of this offloading of SoftBank shares is not clear, but it did apparently happen earlier this year. And this comes, of course, after last week SoftBank shares surged when we heard that Masayoshi Son was offloading their Alibaba stake. So you're still net seeing SoftBank shares near those May highs. Let's have a look though at BHP, the world's biggest miner. It posted its highest ever, full year profit on those record commodity prices. Shares back to levels we haven't seen since January 2021, and that is of course propelling the overall ASX 200 today. And we spoke to CEO Mike Henry earlier. He's still pretty bullish out there despite of course the concerns about China's economy. He says the emergence from the COVID lockdowns will provide a tailwind to the global economy, and that will offset some of the concerns we have over the slowdown in that economy. When it comes to analyst recommendations on BHP, we've got 10 buys, 15 holds, 4 sells on the Bloomberg A&R function. Yusuf.
Jules, thank you very much for some of those crucial insights, Juliet Saleh there. Let's get back to this part of the world because we've got Iran finally nearing a return to the 2015 nuclear deal, maybe with world powers. Well, that's the question this morning after Tehran responded to an EU proposal for reviving the deal. Simone Foxman is watching the latest from Doha. Simone, this is a story that's been going on for a good chunk of a few years for sure. There's a level of fatigue that easily sets in, but that shouldn't keep us from addressing even the small bits of progress when it's made.
No, it's not, and it certainly shouldn't keep us from addressing them when we see a reaction in the oil markets with oil prices falling significantly. But it's really hard to say at this moment if this time is different. So as you may know, the EU presented what it called a final text of an agreement to revive this 2015 nuclear deal to Iran. Iran late last night sent a written response, but we don't know exactly what was in that response. We do understand from some of the reporting here, it wasn't a straight yes or no, which suggests that Iran had some more things that it wanted to incorporate, but we don't know exactly how significant those demands were. When I look at analysts and I talk to folks about what's happening here, a lot of folks really still quite skeptical that we'll get this progress just because we've been so close to a deal, or it seems so close in the past. One indicator I've been following, Eurasia Group puts out a percentage percentage probability of the likelihood that these folks will return to the deal this year, they're still at 35%, despite some of the developments we've seen over the last couple of days, down from 70% in April, just a couple of months ago. One of the main things we're going to be watching for as we hopefully get some more details about exactly what Iran's response was the kind of economic guarantees that the U.S. and other world powers may be willing to provide if Iran does decide to come back to the deal. This has increasingly become a sticking point. But as yet, we still don't know what Iran's demanding. We still don't know what the EU, US, and the others are likely to give up. So very much an open question, despite the moves we're seeing in the market.
And then a bit of progress in Oman. Basically, you had a series of downgrades from ratings agencies, and now the first upgrade, this time from Fitch. What's changed, and how much is the oil windfall helping swell up some of the revenue coffers?
Well, that's certainly a piece of Fitch's rationale here. Oman's decision to also repay some of the debt that it had outstanding with that oil windfall. Also talk in this upgrade rationale about the success of Oman's economic reform program. Even though they see it slowing down, they still see this in the medium long term as something that's going to be very successful for getting Oman's economy back on track. They see surpluses over the next couple of years, and that's part of the rationale for this upgrade. Now, I want to give you a look at both Oman and Bahrain. These are two of the most indebted countries in this region, and they've been under the most market pressure. We have a GTV Go chart here for our clients. Bahrain, mind you, yesterday also reporting an $88 million surplus for the first half, but clearly the market's favoring Oman at this point rather than Bahrain. Again, that economic reform program, something they've been a little bit more successful for, but we'll see if ultimately this oil windfall will cause other rating agencies to follow suit, and then also if this will bleed over into Bahrain.
And then on the weather front, this time not in the Gulf where there's been quite a bit of turbulence, but a heat wave in North Africa.
Yeah, real focus here on Algeria because this is key for Europe's gas supplies. But Algeria over the past weekend used 16,800 megawatts of electricity. This was the most electricity ever. Because Algeria uses natural gas to produce its own electricity, that means there's less of a surplus for Europe. We saw this in the pipeline flows into Mazzara in Italy. That's a place in Sicily where the pipeline flows come into. So a 30% decrease in just the past couple of days. Spain also may be impacted, although Algeria's supply has fallen over a diplomatic spat recently. Everyone in Europe trying to fill up their storage capacity ahead of winter. But if we see heat waves, if we see these climate pressures in North Africa, that's an added challenge as we're still facing this challenge from Russia and Ukraine and the ongoing issues over supplies there, Yusuf.
Absolutely, Simone. Thank you for highlighting that. That's Simone Foxman at the Qatar Financial Center in Doha. I want to stay with the region. Talk about a pivotal data point, and that is inflation in Saudi Arabia, because that remains contained relative to peers in the region. Here are the numbers. The benchmark CPI rose 2.7% year on year in July. Food and beverages jumped almost 4%. Let's head out to Monica Malik, the chief economist at Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank. Monica, is the worst of this wave of cost pressures over? What is the data telling you?
Good morning, Yusuf. Well, the headline data shows that inflation still remains very contained in Saudi Arabia, and that's to a large degree due to the fuel price caps that we've seen introduced from mid of last year. We have seen the global trends filter in, however, into the Saudi inflation data. So as you mentioned, a key driver of inflation that we've seen in the beginning of the year and in the mid of the year has been price inflation. But the latest print does show that that is decelerating both on a monthly basis and on a year-on-year basis. So I think that is positive as we're seeing global food prices come down from spiking up in February and March. That's very positive. Other global factors have also been
Looks like we've had a technical problem there with Monica Malik. We'll get into the inflation conversation again. Much more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
However you get your news.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak with Lee.
On Bloomberg Radio.
Welcome to Daybreak Australia.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
This is Bloomberg Green.
On TV, radio, and the web, this is Bloomberg.
All right, we've patched up the lines. Let's get back out to Monica Malik, the chief economist at Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank, as we reflect on the CPI numbers in Saudi Arabia. Monica, you're saying that you're seeing quite a bit of moderation. I'm wondering what the headwinds of the second half of the year are going to bring, specifically around what the Fed is going to do with interest rate hikes and potentially a turning around of the U.S. dollar outperformance.
Absolutely. Well, we continue to see further rate hikes out of the US, albeit at a more gradual pace. Our core scenario now is a 50 basis points rate hike in September, followed by 25 basis points each in November and December. And again, we expect the GCC central banks to largely follow. We do believe that the aggressive pace of rate hikes will have an impact on credit demand, although there are going to be variations across the region. So, for example, Saudi Arabia, which is seeing sort of momentum building in its investment program, the transformation program as well, and that'll mean that credit demand is going to continue to be really strong and in the double digits, around 14-15%. But other economies where you've seen more mature investment programs, more consumer-based borrowing, I think those you're going to see more headwinds from the acceleration in interest rates.
Monica, there's been a lot of speculation around what this latest update on the nuclear deal with Iran, Libya pumping more. There's a certain fear, and this is echoed again by a message from a viewer over the IB on the Bloomberg terminal, is basically, is that going to lead to quite a deterioration in the crude prices, both on WTI and on Brent? We saw $5 in 5 hours in the previous trading session. Is there going to be more of that?
Well, I think at the moment the market is focusing on two key areas. One is the Iran deal, and two is the weak data that we're seeing coming out, and especially out of China over the weekend and yesterday. On the Iran deal, there's still a lot of uncertainty. We've had the headline comments, and again, there seems to be a big push to try and get an agreement, especially from the Eurozone, which of course is going to face a critical energy crunch over the winter period. But, how far they've gone, how far the differences have been sort of brought together, the US stance on this, these all remain key uncertainties. So until we get clearer direction, of course, if we get a deal and more Iranian crude flowing into the market, that is going to be downward pressure on oil prices and something that we will have to factor in as well. Our current forecasts do not have that. But we still believe that as we go into the final months of the year, we could see a higher oil price as the Russian sanctions take more effect and as energy demand increases in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah, I mean, you could look at the China data and argue otherwise, and you could hypothesize on a recession getting deeper in various parts of the world. Monica, where in the region and what indicators would you be looking at in terms of getting a quick read or an initial indication of potential trouble for some of the Gulf economies?
Well, of course, we are an oil-based region, so of course oil would be number one. But we've seen quite strong developments in the first half of the year, and that keeps the GCC in a very strong position. And even if we do see downside pressure, we still think the economic outlook will be supported. We've seen a number of fiscal reforms. The budget break-even oil prices have come down, and we continue to see focus on reforms, whether it's the diversification, further fiscal reforms. We've got corporate tax coming in UAE. Oman is talking about income tax. So it's really going to be a focus on how much is that adjustment continuing to happen. But I think that the strong oil price that we've seen so far means areas like funding requirements for this year have come down. Debt levels have been reduced somewhat. So we still remain optimistic on the region. But of course, we've had the data out of Oman and Bahrain. These two countries, while they are benefiting from the high oil prices, will be the most vulnerable to any significant price correction.
Monica, big fan of our chats, leaning on the many, many years of experience in this part of the world. That is Monica Malik, the chief economist at Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank. Thank you for that. Let's get to the equity markets, though, and a bit more color. Joining us now is Farah Al-Bahrawi, our resident expert. So we've got Ma'aden soaring to a record high. Analysts quite surprised by some of the strength in the balance sheet.
Absolutely, Ma'aden really surprised with this for the second quarter, Yusuf, and we've seen how the market has indeed been surprised in the strength of the share price. We closed at a record high yesterday. Naturally, that was due to the second quarter, including at least in the earlier parts, those higher commodity prices before they started pulling back. The caveat here is that analysts actually think that earnings will start to moderate moving into the second half of the year, particularly with aluminum prices going down, or aluminium, as Manas would like me to say, as well as ammonia prices moderating as well. We did have some shortages in ammonia, but still, they think that Ma'aden may not be holding on to that strength of the balance sheet in the second half.
Well, Manas is traveling, so today it's going to be aluminum for sure. What about Naki Water? That performed well on its trading debut. I mean, straight out of the gates, wow.
Absolutely. It's up 30%, the maximum allowed at least for the first 3 trading days in Saudi Arabia. It's one of the strongest opens that we've seen in the kingdom for quite a while, Yusuf. We were just discussing that yesterday, how that performance is going to be. And, it seems that this company, which just bottles water, was of interest to the Saudi market. I don't actually think that we have that similar play in Saudi Arabia. Maybe that's why it's bringing something new to the market. But maybe there's a little bit of a shift in sentiment. The market has been picking up steam in recent weeks, so it seems that the company stepped in at the right time.
And then we're also watching the Saudi Open for some additional reasons today, right?
Absolutely. Aramco yesterday after the close said that they will be reviewing their dividend policy in the second half of the year. Naturally, that is the key thing everyone is watching for Aramco. We know that their earnings are going to be stellar from where the oil prices were at, from their production levels, but the dividend, that is the key question with Aramco. The stock has seen some weakness over the past couple of days after earnings. Seems the market was not pleasantly surprised with the lack of boost in dividends, or rather the fact that there was none. So keep an eye out on Aramco, but at the same time, with oil shedding at, you said $5 was it overnight, that is going to be another key factor probably weighing on the entire market. So Saudi Open is going to be the one I'm watching today.
Yeah, dividend policy front and center. Clearly, they're watching this program as well. Thank you, Farah, for that. That's Farah Al-Bahrawi. I want to get to some of the global issues because China's military says it held fresh patrols around Taiwan to, quote, fight back against another U.S. congressional visit. It comes less than 2 weeks after live fire drills following House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taipei. Singapore's Prime Minister in waiting, Lawrence Wong, told us in an exclusive interview that the U.S. and China could sleepwalk into conflict.
After the Ukraine war, the relations have become more strained, and following the visit, tensions have gone up one notch, and that's the risk that can happen, that we are starting to see a series of decisions being taken by both countries that will lead us into more and more dangerous territory. If an accident were to happen today, the consequences may be more difficult to manage. And so we worry about these sorts of near misses and accidents and miscalculations, and we certainly hope that the leadership on both sides can continue to engage one another, especially at the highest level, and that sensible and rational decisions can be made to prevent things from worsening or deteriorating further.
What about the biggest worry, of course, is a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. How likely do you think that is?
I think Taiwan is certainly one flashpoint. It can easily become very dangerous, as we have seen in recent events, and can even escalate quite quickly. Not because either party deliberately wants it to become a flashpoint, because, as I said, both sides understand the consequences and really do not want to go into conflict. The leadership on both sides understand this, but it's, as they say, no one deliberately wants to go into battle, but we sleepwalk into conflict, and that's the biggest problem and danger.
If Nancy Pelosi really wanted to stand up to China, if she really wanted to get emerging Asia, countries like yourself, on the side of America, surely the way to come to this region is to come with a trade pact, not with the way she proceeded.
Well, we have been encouraging America to do more in the region, and that's been our consistent message. But we also understand America's domestic politics and its constraints. So in that sense, we encourage America to do as much as it can, as much as its domestic politics allow. So from that point of view, we welcome the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and it's good that many ASEAN countries have also come forward to be part of this framework at its launch. But as we have repeatedly told the Americans, the launch is only the beginning.
There's very few signs of Joe Biden wanting to expend either blood or treasure. I mean, trade pacts are hardly a small version of treasure, but he won't even go that far.
Especially as we deal with a more uncertain environment, with COVID, with economic slowdown, with inflation. These are pressing challenges for countries everywhere, for governments everywhere. So we just have to deal with these realities. But I would say from our engagements with the administration and people in the U.S. administration, they do understand the strategic importance of engaging this part of the world. And I'm sure they will do everything they can to strengthen and enhance that engagement. From Singapore's point of view, we look at it this way. We want to create a framework in Asia, in the Asia Pacific, particularly in Southeast Asia, where all the major powers have stakes in the region, both US and both China. We think that will contribute to a stabler configuration and overlapping circle of friendships.
Do you worry about protectionism being on the rise in this region?
We do. In a way, the broader concern is that the world is at a turning point. We are entering a new scenario, a new world order, where increasingly trade, economics, finance is being used as instruments of geopolitical contest. I mean, the old logic used to be that with more trade we can tamp down geopolitical rivalries. I think now there is another logic at play, which is geopolitics can undermine trade. And we worry about that because this will lead us to a more divided and dangerous world.
Such a timely conversation there with the Deputy Prime Minister of Singapore. I want to get to some of the market action here because looking at equity futures, we're called a little bit lower. Overnight stocks defying the gloomy data. That's despite the data on New York manufacturing and some of the indicators that came through from China. But 13F filings were super fascinating, to say the least. One of them coming from Michael Burry's Scion hedge fund. They cut their long holdings to just one. They dropped 11 stocks in the second quarter, including Alphabet and Meta, and they're left with this prison operator called the Geo Group. Scion Group holding $165 million at the end of the second quarter. They declined to comment on the filing. The 13F information is going to be the platform for a lot of discussion throughout the morning. I want to get to some of the other market action, specifically on oil. I consider myself relatively, before we get to oil, let's stay with U.S. Treasuries here for a minute because we're looking at U.S. 10s at 278.06. That's despite the stocks rally, holding some of the gains, strong appetite from investors outside of the United States. Now let's get to oil, because I like to think of myself as a relatively resilient individual, but that is often tested by the 200-day moving average, specifically on WTI. This is also the 100-day moving average, and we've broken through both of these. That gives you a sense of the kind of volatility in the price action as we continue to reflect on both progress being made, or the lack of progress being made in Iran, and what is coming out of Libya as well, vis-a-vis the data out of China. I mean, I don't envy any of the oil traders out there in terms of what they have to grapple with. And then this is going to be the state of play in terms of the energy story. Much more coverage ahead as we look at a live shot of London. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
So the inflation environment has been changing a little bit. Inflation's been very low for 25 years. Now people think inflation's coming back. How are you going to deal with that?
I think many of the tools that we've historically used to battle inflation no longer work in the same ways they used to. I think people oftentimes thought of housing as a way, or especially retail and real estate as a way to hedge against inflation. Less and less possible the way we've invested in it. I think commodities similarly have been thought of as a way to hedge against inflation. There are challenges over the long term. Equities have been a hedge against inflation. We will continue to do what we have done in the past, which is build a diversified portfolio where there are many different opportunities that have the possibility of hedging against inflation, because different types of inflation have to be hedged in different ways. So if it's a very quick increase of inflation as opposed to a slow rise of inflation, is it temporary? Is it a long and a persistent type of inflation? So for us, I never model myself an economist that can predict where inflation is going. And so what I need to do is build a diversified portfolio where there are different options that can fight the different types of inflation and to pay close attention to it. And you know, fundamentally, it's done through the equity markets.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Danny Berger in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda. Smart money dumps stocks. Michael Burry and Tiger Global sold big last quarter as equities slid. But Tiger Global and George Soros pile into big tech before the rebound. Sharing the pain, Germany slaps a gas levy on households amid surging costs for energy. Plus, pick your poison. Nouriel Roubini says there are only two options for the U.S. economy, a hard landing or uncontrolled inflation. Well, a warning there from Roubini and from the U.S. data showing that home builder sentiment alongside New York manufacturing data, all of that sliding, yet a clear rift in this market. That rift manifesting in equities which continue to power higher alongside haven assets. So which of them is right? You are looking at Asia stocks. They are charting higher despite concerns in China. That surprise cut yesterday coupled with weak data. European stocks, those are also catching up to the U.S. rally yesterday. Yes, we are looking at an S&P future and NASDAQ session, which is weaker, but only slightly weaker. NASDAQ futures, those were at the lows after that great Bloomberg scoop that Apple is laying off its recruiters, about 100 let go in the past week. Now, looking at this cross-asset picture, you are looking at a stronger dollar versus the offshore renminbi. That is a change from yesterday when we saw the biggest decline since 2019, the weakest since May. Again, it's that bad data from China coupled with the rate cut. Perhaps that rate cut is not enough. It's spurring a move to havens, to bonds throughout the globe, especially Australia and New Zealand, where yields they're down by more than 10 basis points, 10 exactly for the Kiwi 10-year yield. Again, repricing that China pain. Finally, you are looking at Brent crude sliding below $95 a barrel. Also, Iran, a possible nuclear deal there, pushing oil lower. Of course, we'll get more into that in just a moment. Speaking of which, let's get to our reporters from around the world. Charlie Wells is with us to talk through the latest 13F hedge fund filings. David Stringer's in Melbourne with a look at BHP's bumper earnings, and Stephen Stupczynski to dissect the latest on the Iran nuclear deal, and Juliet Sally in Singapore with all the latest on Asia markets. So let's concentrate on the U.S., where money managers, they've been filing their 13Fs for the second quarter. And those, of course, showing how they've been positioned during what has been a very bumpy period for stocks. Joining us now to dig into this is Bloomberg's Charlie Wells. So, Charlie, I know that these often can be a bit backward looking, but looking at the 13Fs, do they give us a sense of direction where we're going, considering that we've been just so polarized in this bull-bear spread and tension in the market?
Yeah, well, Danny, they sort of explain some of the whiplash that we've been feeling lately. And what we know looking back to the end of the second quarter was that these hedge funds were in a very risk-off position, and that conviction was incredibly strong. So some of them cut their exposure to equities broadly by over 50%. I'm talking the likes of Tiger Global. I'm talking about D1 Capital, cutting more than 50%. When you think about Tiger, they had about $46 billion in equity exposure at the end of 2021. You look at the end of last quarter, that was down to about $11 billion. So a significant drop, but that ended up hurting them in July, as we know. They sort of sold the dip and then missed the rally.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of excitement over that Michael Burry position and cutting basically everything save for one stock. Speaking of which, so that's sort of the big picture. What about some of the individual names?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I think when we think about tech, what we saw was some of these funds picking up Amazon, interestingly, which over the period of the second quarter was down about 35%. So this looks like a sort of attempt to kind of buy the dip there in Amazon. Strikingly, when you look at another tech company, Microsoft, you saw some hedge funds, the same hedge funds that were picking up Amazon, actually dumping Microsoft. This is the likes of D1 Capital Capital and Maverick. Strikingly, we also saw some defensive plays. I think the mood in the market at that time was certainly very recession concerned. We saw, Berkshire Hathaway, not a hedge fund, but still picking up a lot of Occidental Petroleum, and Dan Loeb's Third Point Capital in a very sort of recession preparation mode, picking up a significant chunk of Colgate-Palmolive.
Interesting stuff, Charlie. Thanks as always. That's Charlie Wells breaking down those 13F filings. To corporate news, where BHP, the world's biggest miner, posted its highest ever full-year profit on record commodity prices. The producer plans to push ahead with growth options on a stronger demand outlook in China.
We think China is going to be a tailwind on growth. We can see positive growth supportive policy settings in China as they come out of COVID lockdowns, bit of stimulus in the months ahead. We think that over the next 6 to 12 months, China, if anything, is going to provide some stability to global growth and will help offset some of the slowing that we see elsewhere.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's Asia Energy team leader, David Stringer. So, David, the string of record profits for all of these mining and metals companies continues. But given some of the turn in the market we've seen, what does the outlook look like for BHP and its peers?
Well, look, full of surprises today. As you were saying there, we saw BHP deliver record full-year underlying earnings. It announced a record full-year dividend. But maybe the biggest surprise was its bullishness on China, certainly compared to some of its peers. China, of course, the biggest commodities consumer, the most important market in the commodities universe. And unlike, other sectors, unlike economists who've been relatively negative on the outlook for China, here was BHP, one of the businesses more exposed than any other to that market, sort of giving positive signals. It certainly sees, as it said, growth and the economy to improve over the next 12 months, and it already sees some signs of recovery in key sectors like infrastructure and in the automotive industry. So along with those surprise bumper results, also a surprise on the outlook and one to the upside.
Yeah, and of course, the market not too positively positioned on China, especially some of these commodity producing currencies. So interesting to see that dichotomy. David, thanks so much. Bloomberg's David Stringer there. Now, sticking on the energy story, Iran has sent the EU its official response to the bloc's proposal for reviving the 2015 nuclear accord. That signals it may be near to a deal with the U.S. that could restore Iranian oil exports to global markets. Let's get to Bloomberg's Stephen Stubchinsky, our energy reporter. So, Stephen, what's the status of discussions with Iran right now?
Right now, we're looking to see what this means that they sent back this letter to the EU. They're expecting, according to local reports, a response in the next 2 days. The local minister, the foreign minister in Iran, said that there's a possibility a deal could be done in a few days with if the U.S. had a pragmatic approach and agreed to terms that they wanted. At the same time, there have been some other local reports in a more hardline, right-leaning newspaper in Iran where an editorial ran that said that there have been discussions of a nuclear deal, reviving the nuclear deal from all corners, which indicates that potentially the folks who are leading Iran could be closer to closing in on something, and that could be in the cards. Now, if there is some sort of revival to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, you'll see Iran being able to add more oil to the market at a time where the market needs the oil. Things are tight, and it would add more downward pressure to oil prices, which is why we've seen a bit of a sell-off after the last few sessions because of this potential of a Iran deal.
Stephen, thanks so much. Bloomberg's Stephen Stubchinsky there. Now, the PBOC has offered no pushback after the yuan slid to a 3-month low. Let's get to all the market action in Asia with Juliet Sally in Singapore. Jules.
Hey, Danny. Yes, certainly, of course, we've got these 2022 lows in sight for the yuan after the offshore yuan slid past 6.8 to the dollar yesterday. Now, with Capital Economics saying 7 in sight. It is strengthening today, but what is the difference here is the widening discount between the on and offshore. And that is the most since May. Normally signals a lot of pessimism about this currency, and that's normally when the PBOC steps in. But today they didn't. They actually set the fixing weaker by about 0.5%. That is the biggest cut since August 3. So one to continue to watch. We're also watching the moves coming through in China's bond market. Let's flip the board. We saw those big drops coming through in yields on the 10-year yesterday, continuing to happen today with the yield on China's 10-year holding around those May 2020 lows. And as you mentioned, this is also a story of bonds rallying across the Antipodean bond market as well in Australia and New Zealand. You also had the RBA today continuing to indicate that they are going to be data dependent. There is no set path for rates, but they did flag they are likely to hike again. Another story we are watching is this sell down coming through in SoftBank. This is on an FT report that the hedge fund Elliott Management has actually offloaded almost all of its stake in SoftBank. And all of this uncertainty over China's economy, that surprise cut we had coming through yesterday, leading to a fairly flat market on the MSCI Asia Pacific Index. So some of that weakness that you are seeing being offset by gains in the likes of the Hong Kong market, also Australia being boosted by BHP today. Danny.
Jules, thank you very much. Bloomberg's Juliet Sally there in Singapore. Now let's take a look at some of the key things that market participants are going to be watching out for today. 7 a.m. UK time, so in just less than an hour, we'll get the UK labour data. Unemployment, that's expected to remain around 3.8% in the 3 months to June. Jobs market, that remained red hot through the quarter. Then we're going to get the Germany ZEW survey for August, investor confidence in Europe's largest economy. Now, that's been really hard hit by soaring inflation, energy crisis, and the war in Ukraine. 12 p.m. UK time, one of the big retail names, Walmart, that will release its second quarter earnings results. That's going to be followed by Home Depot. Finally, a couple of other U.S. data points out this afternoon. We have housing starts and industrial production for July. All of that following the weak U.S. data yesterday. Will it confirm that, or will it be hot enough to spur more bets for Fed hikes? Speaking of which, coming up, we're going to hear from Dr. Doom himself, economist Nouriel Roubini. His forecast for the U.S. economy, as you'd imagine, not a happy one. That's coming up shortly. Plus, Germany introduces a household levy on natural gas as Putin squeezes energy flows to Europe. More on that story later. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
China's appetite for energy is enormous. The country consumes about a quarter of the world's energy supply, 35% more than the US annually. Its energy needs have more than tripled since the year 2000. That consumption has helped to fuel astonishing growth, but it's come at a cost.
China is the world's largest greenhouse gas emitter. There is no way to tackle climate change unless China reduces its emissions to net zero.
The country's reliance on fossil fuels is also a hindrance to its own growth and the well-being of its citizens.
China is not energy secure. It has a massive import bill for things like oil and gas. It has a long-standing pollution problem, and it is also prone to outages that severely hamper industry.
All this has led the world's biggest polluter to take steps towards a radical transformation.
On the David Rubenstein Show, peer-to-peer conversations, I uncover the untold stories of the world's most successful leaders. Watch Wednesdays on Bloomberg Television.
Even if you were at 3.8, we have inflation still well above target, around 8%, falling only gradually. Core inflation around 6-ish. You're still in negative territory. So the Fed funds rate should be going well above 4%, 4.5% to 5% in my view, to really push inflation towards 2. If that doesn't happen, inflation expectations are going to get unhinged. Or if that happens, then we're going to have a hard landing. So either way, either you get a hard landing or you get inflation getting out of control.
Economist Nouriel Roubini there, aka Dr. Doom, doing what he does best. Pessimism there weighing in on the Fed's inflation fight. Let's add another smart voice to the conversation. It's Mark Otswald, global strategist and chief economist at ADM Investor Services. So, Mark, in that conversation with Roubini, he goes on to say that markets expecting a pivot in the Fed cutting rates next year, to me, sounds delusional. Are markets delusional right now, Mark?
I don't think they're necessarily delusional, but I do think there's some old habits which die hard. Above all, because the Fed actually hasn't really started to reduce the size of the balance sheet. So really what we've got is a situation where all the excess liquidity which has been pumped in during the pandemic is still there and burning a hole in, effectively burning a hole in a lot of people's pockets. And the assessment, quite naturally, is now at the beginning of the second half of the year, after a very tempestuous first half of the year, valuations in equities, in credit, and high yields on government bonds make them more attractive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the market's rationale on the Fed is correct. And I think really where the big dichotomy here is, yes, the markets may be right that the Fed can't actually go to perhaps as high as Mr. Roubini is suggesting as 4.5%. But equally, I would say they're very wrong on the idea that the Fed will basically reintroduce the Fed put and start cutting rates and indeed reversing its, or at least stopping its quantitative tightening sometime at the start of next year.
That's such an important point, the fact that we haven't seen QT fully play through markets. Bank of America says that it could induce a 7% reduction in equities. How are you looking at the effects of QT and what markets are most mispriced and perhaps expecting QT not to follow through in QE in the future?
Well, I think the one where I'm concerned about the US without any shadow of a doubt, but on the other hand, it's the fact that European equities facing this energy crisis, which isn't going away, with all the problems related to the drought in Europe and power supply and transport, it's the fact that European equities have rallied so hard. And secondly, that we've seen this big crunch in credit spreads, particularly over the last 5 to 6 weeks, which worries me because, apart from anything else, that actually encourages the Fed to say, sorry, markets, you're meant to be doing some of the work for us here. We're telling you we're not actually going to relent at the moment. So why are you loosening financial conditions?
Does that mean, Mark, and I know we have a great chart from this from our markets editor Valerie Teitel, this idea that we have seen those spreads move quite dramatically, a tightening of something like 170 basis points for high yield. So you couple that with equities, as you say, and it leads to financial conditions are loosening. Now, you said that the Fed put that's not coming back, but does this translate into a Fed call where they need to slam down harder because conditions are loosening with what markets are doing?
Yes. I mean, I would make the quick observation here on the high yield spreads. The high yield spreads is actually quite bad news in a funny sort of way. The high yield spreads are crunching down because the big bulk of the borrowers in that are actually US shale oil producers. They've seen a big swing in their free cash flow. And instead of investing in upstream oil and gas, they're actually paying down debt, which is good news in balance sheet terms. It's very bad news in terms of the energy price outlook because we're simply not going to get that, some pickup in that arena. So, I think that's, this is really where the problem lies, but it becomes self-feeding between credit and equities, i.e., the more that credit spreads tighten, the more that equities are likely to rally, until such point as people realize that actually the news on credit isn't actually as good as people think.
Mark, what do you make of the muted supply volumes we've had? I guess save perhaps for oil and gas. Is there a fear, is a fear rational that we might have a freezing up of the primary market, making it difficult for corporates to access debt markets?
Well, we've already had one freeze up. The issuance this year, both in investment grade and above all in high yield, is way down on where we were last year. Yes, one can argue that last year was exaggerated by the fact that there was all that central bank QE going into the market. But I think the other worrying aspect of it is the investment grade issuance has actually been dominated by banks. And the banks, in a lot of cases, are basically bolstering their balance sheets because they actually can't sell some of the secondary loans which they're using for M&A onto the market because there isn't actually quite that demand for risk that there appears to be.
All right, Mark, great to have you on this morning. Mark Otswald there, global strategist and chief economist at ADM Investor Services. Coming up, Singapore's Prime Minister in waiting, Lawrence Wong, warns that the U.S. and China may be sleepwalking into conflict. We have more on that next. This is Bloomberg.
This month, as the world watches inflation rise, employment rebound, and fiscal policies react, all roads lead to Jackson Hole for the Kansas City Fed's 2022 Economic Policy Symposium. Bloomberg's all-star team is live as policymakers and financial insiders discuss the economic issues and solutions that keep the world's money moving. Coverage starts August 25th, only on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
Is it possible the industry is in an arms race that will lead to spending itself into an oversupply? I mean, that has happened before.
We've looked at this very carefully, and the digitization of everything. Tell me what aspect of your life, Emily, isn't becoming more digital?
Well, I'm trying to prevent that, but yes, I think it's happening.
And COVID has accelerated that. The industry crossed $500 billion last year, the semiconductor industry overall, and estimates are $1 trillion, a doubling by the end of the decade at that point. I believe those estimates. It's not that there's not going to be some blips and turns on the way, and the majority of that is driven by leadership process technology, of which only 3 companies can satisfy that need.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Danny Berger in London. China's military says it held fresh patrols around Taiwan to, quote, fight back against another U.S. congressional visit. It comes less than 2 weeks after live fire drills following House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taipei. Singapore's Prime Minister in waiting, Lawrence Wong, told us in an exclusive interview that the U.S. and China could sleepwalk into conflict.
After the Ukraine war, the relations have become more strained, and following the visit, tensions have gone up 1 notch, and that's the risk that can happen, that we are starting to see a series of decisions being taken by both countries that will lead us into more and more dangerous territory. If an accident were to happen today, the consequences may be more difficult to manage. And so we worry about these sorts of near misses and accidents and miscalculations, and we certainly hope that the leadership on both sides can continue to engage one another, especially at the highest level, and that sensible and rational decisions can be made to prevent things from worsening or deteriorating further.
What about the biggest worry, of course, is a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. How likely do you think that is?
I think Taiwan is certainly one flashpoint. It can easily become very dangerous, as we have seen in recent events, and can even escalate quite quickly. Not because either party deliberately wants it to become a flashpoint, because as I said, both sides understand the consequences and really do not want to go into conflict. The leadership on both sides understand this, but it's, as they say, no one deliberately wants to go into battle, but we sleepwalk into conflict, and that's the biggest problem and danger.
If Nancy Pelosi really wanted to stand up to China, if she really wanted to get emerging Asia, countries like yourself, on the side of America, surely the way to come to this region is to come with a trade pact, not with the way she proceeded.
Well, we have been encouraging America to do more in the region, and that's been our consistent message, but we also understand America's domestic politics and its constraints. So in that sense, we encourage America to do as much as it can, as much as its domestic politics allow. So from that point of view, we welcome the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and it's good that many ASEAN countries have also come forward to be part of this framework at its launch. But as we have repeatedly told the Americans, the launch is only the beginning.
There's very few signs of Joe Biden wanting to expend either blood or treasure. I mean, trade pacts are hardly a small version of treasure, but he won't even go that far.
Especially as we deal with a more uncertain environment, with COVID, with economic slowdown, with inflation. These are pressing challenges for countries everywhere, for governments everywhere. So we just have to deal with these realities. But I would say from our engagements with the administration and people in the US administration, they do understand the strategic importance of engaging this part of the world. And I'm sure they will do everything they can to strengthen and enhance that engagement. From Singapore's point of view, we look at it this way. We want to create a framework in Asia, in the Asia Pacific, particularly in Southeast Asia, where all the major powers have stakes in the region, both US and both China. We think that will contribute to a stabler configuration, an overlapping circle of friendships.
Do you worry about protectionism being on the rise in this region?
We do. In a way, the broader concern is that the world is at a turning point. We are entering a new scenario, a new world order, where increasingly trade, economics, finance is being used as instruments of geopolitical contest. Now, I mean, the old logic used to be that with more trade we can tamp down geopolitical rivalries. I think now there is another logic at play, which is geopolitics can undermine trade. And we worry about that because this will lead us to a more divided and dangerous world.
Singapore's Deputy Prime Minister Lawrence Wong there speaking exclusively to Bloomberg editor-in-chief John Micklethwaite. Of course, geopolitical tensions in China, those for now being overshadowed by weak data and a surprise cut from the PBOC yesterday. You can see some of that still playing out in markets. Part of the concern of global slowdown, of course, that's coupled with U.S. data means we are looking at a rally in bonds. Aussie bonds, those 10-year yields down by about 14 basis points. Similar view when it comes to the Kiwi as well. China renminbi, that is giving back some of what we've seen. It's down about 0.2% versus the U.S. dollar. Is 7 in sight? That's at least what John Higgins over at Capital Economics thinks is to come given the economy. Well, coming up on the program, Germany introduces a household levy on natural gas with Putin squeezing energy flows to Europe. We're going to have more on that story for you next. This is Bloomberg.
We believe in the power of ideas. That's why we launched Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst. This platform will help them share their ideas to reshape our world. Bold thinking, breakthrough action. Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst.
When I started, I had no idea it was going to turn into this, just a tracksuit empire. I don't have any investors. All this is all money in. This is me going out and hustling, bringing that money back, and just building it. You gotta think about a person that was homeless at one point, didn't really have any money coming in. The fact that this person was relentless and just determined to succeed and not let rock bottom define him as an individual. I can take things and put them together and take them apart and make them better and put them back together. I respect the craft, so I don't want to minimize and disrespect the value of each step of the craft and do by machine what should be done by hand.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg?
That is a great question.
It's a great question.
Great question. Great question.
Best question I get all night.
Bloomberg, top experts, great questions.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Danny Berger in London, and these are the stories that set your agenda. Smart money dumped stocks. Michael Burry and Tiger Global sold big last quarter as equities slid. But Tiger and George Soros also piled into big tech before the rebound. Sharing the pain, Germany slaps a gas levy on households amid surging costs for energy. Plus, pick your poison. Nouriel Roubini says there are only two options for the U.S. economy, a hard landing or uncontrolled inflation. Well, good morning. Happy Tuesday. It is a dichotomy in this market. You have equities which continue to rally and a cross-asset picture, be it bonds, be it commodities, which show a little bit more hesitation. In Asia, you are looking at stocks that are slightly weaker, down 0.1%, but for the most part, they've held up pretty well given the economic picture in Asia. That couples with weak data coming from the U.S. yesterday. You had home builders. That sentiment looked weak. A New York manufacturing survey, that was also the second weakest since 2001. Now, equities in the U.S. rallied yesterday, so seeing a little bit of catch the dollar this morning, but not enough to make up for the weakness we saw yesterday, one of its biggest slides since 2019. You also have the sense that investors are repricing China. They're pricing in this China slowdown. You're looking at bond yields in Australia and New Zealand weaker by weaker by at least 10 basis points. And finally, Brent crude, that's sliding nearly 1% under $95 a barrel. We also have a possibility of Iran gas coming, oil, coming back online. Let's stick with the energy story, specifically focusing in on the European crisis. Germany's government says that households, they will face an additional cost of about 290 euros to pay for natural gas as the burden of Russia's squeeze on energy flows to the continent is redistributed. Joining us now is Bloomberg's bureau chief, Birgit Yenin. So, Birgit, what would this levy mean for companies specifically?
Well, the government has introduced it in order actually to ease the burden on the companies, because obviously Germany is facing rising energy costs. It is going across the world, but Germany's business and industry is particularly hit. So in order really also for the energy companies to lower the costs, there was always a debate that also the consumers will have to pay a share of this. And this is really what the government is doing. And they have also already announced that maybe some other companies really need some more aid, and they are therefore looking also at other measures to actually ease the burden on companies.
Well, of course, we have the government issuing a levy for consumers. Why would they do this? And presumably, politically, that's tricky for Scholz.
It's actually really tricky. One has to see that Scholz's popularity is going down currently. And the tensions within the coalitions have been from the start really, high, one can say. So at the moment, Scholz is really gambling a little bit, because during the winter, one can expect that people will feel also actually the cold, and they will be asked to cut back on energy consumption. And at the same time, they they are going to face a higher gas bill and the leeway. So there is a risk for Scholz at the moment that it is all in the winter coming together, and that really his popularity is going to slump, and that will then also impede on his ability actually to keep the coalition together.
All right, Birgit, thank you very much. Bloomberg's Birgit Yenin there. Let's quickly get to some breaking lines over Credit Suisse. A Bloomberg scoop that Credit Suisse could face further delays in getting its China operations approved after a flurry of executive exits. The regulators there telling Credit Suisse that they'll be unable to get some of those operations online until they fill some of these key roles. So again, delaying some of their China operations, a lot of senior management departures causing this. And again, it will really be until any positions are filled. That's when they'll get some of those on-site inspections, which is the final step to allow them to build out its wealth management business onshore. Of course, a big part of Credit Suisse's expansion looking at that China wealth management. All right, we'll bring you those lines as they continue to cross. Let's get back to the energy story. And Iran has sent the EU its official response to the bloc's proposal for reviving the 2015 nuclear accord. It comes after Tehran signaled it may be near a deal with the U.S. that could restore Iranian oil exports to the global market. Joining me now is Bloomberg's energy reporter Stephen Stupczynski. Stephen, what's the latest on these discussions with Iran?
So right now, Iran has responded to the EU comments, and they're waiting now for the EU to get back to them to respond to that response, according to local reports. We've had the Iranian foreign minister mention that they would be able to make some sort of deal or revive the nuclear deal from 2015 with the U.S. if they were able to come to some sort of agreement within the next few days. So there is a bigger mood now in the room that this could become a reality. You know, these discussions have gone on for months. They've been derailed multiple times, but it's looking like there is a higher possibility of this deal being revived to allow Iran to bring more oil to the market, help stabilize things, which will, of course, bring more downward pressure to WTI and Brent prices.
All right, Stephen, thank you very much. Bloomberg's Stephen Stupczynski there. Let's stay on the energy story. Joining us now is Nadia Martin-Wiggin, energy partner and chief oil analyst at Pareto Securities. Nadia, I kind of want to join these two stories together. One of record high power prices in Europe, the relentingly high nat gas prices in Europe, and oil which has started to move lower. If we're looking at something like $375 a barrel equivalent in nat gas, is it right that we should be seeing oil prices move lower? What would be the ramifications that gets priced in terms of switching over to oil with the prohibitively high costs in that gas?
Well, thank you very much. We had a lot of gas to oil switching already last year. You know, energy prices in natural gas, electricity in Europe have already been very high. So on top of what we saw switch last year, maybe there's another 100,000 barrels per day of demand that can come from oil versus what we saw in natural gas last year. And that was already 500,000 barrels per day of a swing. When we look globally, I'd put it at around 250 to 350,000 barrels a day, but that depends on China. And this is when we look at that disconnect that we have seen in the market and where we were going into the summer. We have seen that product prices went very high, they've come down, but crude prices have come down much, much more. And this is because we had the two largest oil importers in the world stop importing. And this is China in particular, which came out yesterday, followed by India. At the same time, we're not building distillate stocks into the winter, which is what we need when we're facing this natural gas crisis. And what we can see with the German move is that they are really trying to actually affect demand also on the consumer side, not just on the industrial side like we've seen this summer, because natural gas demand on the industrial side in Germany is down 20% in the last 2 months, year over year.
Yeah, Nadia, a lot to unpack there. And